Hey everyone, welcome back to OmniWizard. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry Potter became the god of thunder before his Hogwarts letter? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The boy who caught lightning. The first thing Harry Potter ever broke was a window. He was 5 years old and Dudley Dursley had just smashed his toy soldier, the one Harry had found in the park, the one with the red coat and the tiny plastic sword, and Harry had felt something tight and hot coil up behind his ribs. And then the kitchen window had exploded outward, glass spraying across Aunt Petunia's beloved rose bushes like a sudden hard rain. Aunt Petunia had screamed. Uncle Vernon had gone so red Harry thought his neck might pop clean off. Harry had spent 3 days locked in his cupboard with no dinner and a very clear understanding that whatever had happened, it was his fault, it was wrong, and it must never happen again. He'd agreed out loud that it would never happen again. He'd been lying because he was 5 and had no idea what he'd done or how to stop it. By the time he was 7, Harry had a rough working theory. Something lived in him, something that paid attention to his emotions the way a storm front paid attention to heat. When he was frightened, light bulbs blew. When he was angry, electrical things misbehaved. When he was sad and lonely, which was most of the time, the sky outside his cupboard window went dark even on days that had started sunny. He kept this theory to himself, because sharing it with the Dursleys would have been approximately as useful as explaining it to their sofa. The summer he turned 8, Dudley and his friends decided to make a game of chasing Harry across the open field behind Magnolia Crescent. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But this time Harry ran further than he usually did, out past the tree line, across the long grass gone dry and gold in the August heat, all the way to the old open field where the pylons stood, huge and humming, carrying power lines south toward London. The sky had been cloudless when he started running. By the time Dudley's gang lost interest and turned back, laughing and flinging insults at his retreating figure, the sky above Harry was a different color entirely. Green-gray. The particular shade that people in tornado country learned to fear. The air had that pressurized, breathless quality, like the world inhaling before a shout. Harry stood under the pylons and looked up. The lightning hit him. The first bolt came down from a sky that had been empty a second before, struck the pylon directly above him, jumped the arc gap between the metal lattice and the ground, and went through Harry like a thought. That was what it felt like, not pain exactly, or not only pain, but information. A colossal amount of information delivered at the speed of light. He didn't fall. He stood there, every muscle rigid, hair standing out from his skull, and felt the electricity pour through him and not stop, not dissipate, collect, like water finding a vessel it recognized. The second bolt hit 10 seconds later. The third came down 30 seconds after that, not from overhead but horizontally, sideways out of a cloud that had built itself in the space of a minute, the bolt traveling parallel to the earth for almost half a mile before curving down and taking Harry in the chest. He sat down hard in the dry grass. The field smelled of ozone and burning. The pylons above him were singing at a different frequency than before, a deeper note, as if they'd been retuned. Harry looked at his hands. They looked the same. 10 fingers, various small scars from Dudley-related incidents, nails badly chewed. But they tingled, and when he turned his palms up and concentrated, just concentrated, the way he'd learned to focus when he wanted something to stop or start, a small arc of electricity walked between his index finger and his thumb. Blue-white, clean, his. Oh, Harry said to no one. He sat in the field for a long time after that, watching what he could do. The arc grew or shrank depending on how much attention he paid it. He could make it branch. He could make it go still. When he held very still himself and reached out with whatever muscle he'd been using all his life without knowing its name, he could feel the charge in the pylon cables above him the way you could feel heat from a nearby fire, directional, warm, enormous. He went home for dinner because if he didn't, Aunt Petunia would tell Vernon, and Vernon would do something unpleasant. But he went home different. The summer and autumn that followed were Harry's education, and he was his own only teacher. He learned quickly that the storm, he started thinking of it as the storm, capital S, the way you'd capitalize something that deserved its own name, didn't care about his emotions the way it used to. It had cared before because it had no direction, no channel. It was pressure looking for a release. Now it had Harry, and Harry had discipline, the kind of discipline that children raised in hostile households develop early and sharp, the ability to go very still inside, to make yourself small and undetectable, to wait. He practiced at night, in the cupboard, making controlled arcs between his fingers in the dark. He practiced in the field after school, building charge in the autumn clouds, and releasing it in precise bolts that hit exactly where he aimed them. He practiced restraint, which was harder, sitting next to Dudley at dinner while Dudley kicked him under the table, and not letting so much as a spark show at his fingertips. He also learned to fly, not with a broom, which he wouldn't know about for another 3 years. He learned that if you charged the air beneath you, ionized it, pumped enough electromagnetic force into the column below your body, you could push against it the way a magnet pushes against another magnet. It wasn't smooth. The first 30 attempts had him bouncing off the ground like a stone skipping water. But by November, Harry Potter could hover 2 feet off the floor of his cupboard, and he did it in the dark with his eyes closed and his breathing steady, the storm humming through him like a song he'd always known the words to. By the time he turned 9, he stopped being frightened of Dudley entirely. This was a problem from Dudley's perspective, because Dudley had built a significant portion of his identity on Harry being frightened. The first time Harry just looked at him, steady and unreadable, when Dudley shoved him in the corridor at school, Dudley's fist raised, Harry's eyes absolutely calm, Dudley actually stepped back. He covered it by pretending he'd remembered something else he wanted to do, but something had shifted, and they both felt it, and it never fully shifted back. Harry got in trouble at school that year for cheating on his science project about electrical storms. His project was too detailed, his understanding too specific and intuitive. Mrs. Marsh called his aunt in and suggested he had plagiarized from a university source. Aunt Petunia stared at her with that pinched expression that meant she was furious and dignified about it simultaneously, and denied everything on his behalf, which was the first and only time she had ever defended him. Harry suspected she was more interested in protecting the family from the implication of strange cleverness than in protecting Harry. He took the bus to the public library every Saturday that year and read everything they had on atmospheric electricity, electromagnetism, and storm physics. The librarians were used to him. They left him alone, which was all he'd ever really wanted. The winter he was 9, there was a storm off the Sussex coast bad enough to make the local news. Meteorologists called it unusual. The track had shifted, the intensity had dropped, and it had made a hard right turn about 40 miles offshore that no model had predicted. Harry watched the news report in the living room while the Dursleys ate dinner, and he kept his face very carefully blank because he had been at the coast that day on a school trip, and he had felt the storm coming the way you feel someone approaching from behind, and he had quietly, methodically pushed it offshore and then nudged it sideways when it tried to come back. 40,000 people had a dry Guy Fawkes weekend because of him. Nobody knew. Nobody would know. Harry ate his toast and watched the weatherman and said nothing. In June of his 10th year, he found the book. It was in a box at the church jumble sale on Magnolia Crescent, a battered, water-damaged volume with no author listed on the spine, the title almost too faded to read. Accounts of the Old Powers, Storm, Earth, Deep Water, and Flame, being a catalogue of those marked by natural force. The church ladies were selling it for 20 pence. Harry paid with coins he'd been saving and carried it home with his heart beating in a very specific way, a way that said this matters, pay attention. It was not a comfortable book. It was written in the 1300s, in Middle English Harry had to pick through slowly, and it had been annotated by at least 4 subsequent owners who disagreed with each other violently in the margins. But what it described, what it catalogued, case by case in the meticulous way of medieval scholarship were people, men and women across centuries who had been struck by or born into or simply claimed by forces of nature. Not wizards, not sorcerers, something older. Something the book called marked. The marked didn't use wands. They didn't learn from books or follow the rules of inherited tradition. They were, the book's author, with clear theological discomfort, called them sovereign, answerable to the force itself and to nothing else. Harry read the book 3 times. The 3rd time he read it with a piece of paper and was taking notes. He was 10 years old and he was sovereign. He understood what that meant now. Not above the law, he wasn't interested in being above anything, but outside it. Operating by a different set of rules, rules that the storm itself had written, and that came down to roughly this: don't waste it, don't flinch, and don't pretend to be less than you are. He'd been pretending for years. He was done. He was not done hiding from the Dursleys, because he was still 10, and they still controlled his food and his shelter, and the storm didn't solve that particular problem. But inside himself, in the place where he made decisions, something crystallized. He could feel things the other children at school couldn't. Not just electricity and weather, though those were the clearest signals, like turning up the volume on a radio station you'd only half heard before. He could feel the Earth's magnetic field like a constant low pressure on the back of his neck, always pointing north. He could feel other people's electrical fields, the bioelectricity that ran through every human nervous system, the tiny signals that ran down spines and along nerves and gathered in brains as thought. He couldn't read minds. He couldn't hear words, but he could feel states: fear, anger, calm, intent, and people's bodies broadcast these states honestly even when their faces didn't. This was how he knew, in March of his 10th year, that his primary school teacher, Mr. Peters, genuinely liked him and was frustrated he couldn't do more. This was how he knew Aunt Petunia was afraid of him, had always been afraid of him, in a way that went beyond the strange events he caused and into something older, something she'd inherited from her sister's world and never had the vocabulary for. This was how he knew, the one time Dudley's friend Malcolm actually had him backed against the bike shed, fist raised, that Malcolm was not actually going to hit him and was in fact terrified of being hit back. He had stepped away from the bike shed without incident. Malcolm had told everyone Harry had gone mental. Harry didn't mind. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in July. It landed on the doormat with the ordinary post, which was already strange because the Dursleys subscribed to no magazines and received very little ordinary post, and Harry, who'd come downstairs first as he always did to start the kettle, picked it up. His name, his address, the cupboard under the stairs. He turned it over, the red wax seal, the crest, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He stood in the Dursleys' hallway and held the letter for approximately 30 seconds, while the kettle worked up to its complaint and the morning light came gray and ordinary through the frosted glass above the door. Then he opened it. He read it carefully once. He read the list of required supplies. He noted the date of departure, platform 9 3/4, King's Cross Station. He put the letter in his back pocket and finished making tea. When Vernon Dursley came thundering down the stairs 10 minutes later, already read about the collar, Harry was sitting at the kitchen table with his toast and his tea and his book about atmospheric electricity, reading about the behavior of ball lightning with the particular focus he gave to things that interested him. He looked up when Vernon sat down and waited to see if Vernon would mention the letter, but there was no other letter that morning, and it occurred to Harry, in a detached way, that the letter had been addressed specifically to his cupboard, which meant whoever had sent it knew precisely where he lived and precisely who was responsible for that fact. He wondered what they were going to do with that knowledge. He finished his toast. He went upstairs to Dudley's second bedroom, which had been granted to him after a series of increasingly inexplicable events the previous Christmas, and he sat on the edge of the bed and thought carefully. He was going to go. There was never a question about that. He'd read about the magical world in the margins of the old Powers book, in the frantic annotations of whoever had owned it in the 17th century, a wizard by the sounds of it who had encountered a storm-marked woman and been thoroughly unsettled by the experience. Magic was real and it was structured, rule-bound, institutional, everything the storm was not, and apparently he was a part of it, by blood if not by nature. He would go. He would learn what there was to learn. He would meet people who understood the mechanics of impossible things, and that alone was worth whatever complications arrived alongside it. But he was not going as Harry from the cupboard. He was not going as the frightened, thin boy who flinched when people raised their voices and said yes sir to people who'd never earned it. He went to the window and opened it and let the July morning in. The sky was blue and enormous and doing exactly what he told it to do, because it was his sky now, and he raised his face to it and felt the atmospheric charge high above and the warm electromagnetic hum of the earth below and the specific, personal frequency that was the storm moving through him like a tide. He was Harry Potter. He was 10 years old. He had caught lightning 3 times and survived and had been sovereign ever since, and in September he was going to Hogwarts. Let them try to put him in a cupboard there. He smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached all the way in. Vernon Dursley's reaction to the letter, the follow-up letters, the avalanche of letters, 37 in one morning, 12 through the egg slot, was entertainment Harry hadn't expected. He watched the proceedings with calm interest from the corner of rooms, eating whatever was in reach and reading his library books, while Vernon nailed up the letter box, and Petunia went white around the mouth, and Dudley oscillated between fascinated and terrified. When the letter arrived via Hagrid on the little rock island in the storm-lashed sea, when Harry opened the door and found a man the size of a small building filling the doorframe and holding a birthday cake, Harry looked at him for a long moment and felt his bioelectricity. Warm, earnest, badly nervous, intensely loyal to someone, carrying something close to grief alongside something close to joy. "Hello, Harry," Hagrid said. "Happy birthday." "Thank you," Harry said. "Come in." "The Dursleys won't bother you." He said the second part just loudly enough to carry to where Vernon was standing with a rifle that didn't work, because Harry had already quietly discharged it somewhere between Hagrid's approach and the door opening. Vernon put the rifle down. It was less a choice than an instinct. the way animals feel weather. Hagrid sat down and told Harry about the wizarding world, about his parents, about Voldemort, in the rough and tender way of someone who had been keeping a story locked up for a decade and was finally allowed to tell it. Harry listened without interrupting, because Hagrid was speaking with genuine feeling, and that deserved respect. Some of it he knew or had guessed. Some of it his parents, James and Lily, the specific warmth in Hagrid's voice when he talked about them, sat in a new place behind his ribs and asked to be left alone for a while. "You're a wizard, Harry," Hagrid said, with the satisfaction of someone delivering the best news in the world. Harry nodded. "I thought it might be something like that." Hagrid blinked. "Yeah, I've been doing impossible things since I was 5, Harry said reasonably. "It seemed worth considering." Hagrid stared at him. Then he laughed, a laugh like a sack of boulders rolling downhill, and Harry thought he liked Hagrid immediately, the kind of immediate liking that came from the combination of what he could feel and what he could see, an uncomplicated person in the best possible sense. "You're going to fit right in," Hagrid told him. Harry smiled again, the same real kind. "I'm not planning to fit," he said, "but I'm planning to go. That's enough to start with." That night in the narrow bed in the rented hut, listening to the storm that had followed them out here, his storm, he'd been bored during the boat ride and had let it build, and it was a good one. Harry lay with his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling. He was going to a school of magic. He was going to meet hundreds of people who had grown up knowing about magic, who had traditions and histories and families stretching back centuries. Some of them would have opinions about his name. Some of them would have opinions about his scar. Some of them would try to define him by those things. His right hand sparked blue in the dark, just once, a reflex. The thunder outside was deep and very close. He closed his eyes. He was ready. Chapter 2. The worthy Diagon Alley was loud in the way that markets are loud, layered, organic, a dozen conversations and transactions happening simultaneously, and Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes taking in everything. Hagrid moved ahead of him like a ship through shallow water, people parting naturally, and Harry kept pace without any particular hurry, reading the street the way he'd learned to read weather, looking for patterns, pressure systems, the spots where things were building toward something. Owls called from a shop on the left. Cauldrons were stacked in a tower outside a brass-fronted store that smelled of hot metal, and something underneath that, something older. A witch in robes the color of old wine argued with a shopkeeper about the quality of lacewing flies. A pair of boys Harry's age raced past chasing a rolled-up piece of parchment that kept trying to escape. It was extraordinary. Harry found it extraordinary without feeling overwhelmed by it, the way you can find something extraordinary and still remain yourself inside it. Hagrid was moving toward the white marble building that dominated the end of the alley. Gringotts, he'd explained, the wizarding bank, run by goblins, and Harry shouldn't stare. Harry didn't stare, he observed, which was different. The goblins at the entrance stood with the coiled stillness of people who had been underestimated for a long time and had turned that into an advantage. Their eyes were quick and measuring and entirely unimpressed by the traffic of witches and wizards flowing past them. Harry respected that instinctively. Inside, the lobby was enormous, high vaulted ceiling, crystal chandeliers throwing cold light, dozens of goblins at the long counters doing things with ledgers and scales, and instruments Harry didn't recognize. The hum of it was different from any building he'd been in before. Not just the noise, underneath the noise, there was something else. A low, complex vibration that wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite electricity, though it had something in common with both, like the building itself was doing calculations. Hagrid navigated to a counter and spoke to a goblin who introduced himself as Griffook. "Vault 713, Hagrid said, and gave his letter from Dumbledore. Harry's vault, Vault 687, could be visited after, he was told. The cart ride down was the first thing that had surprised Harry in a while. The speed of it, the depth the bank went down into the earth like a dream of geology, layer after layer, temperature dropping, that strange vibration getting stronger the further they went. By the time they reached Vault 713, deep in the older part of the tunnels where the walls were natural rock rather than dressed stone, Harry could feel it clearly. Something was being kept down here that wasn't just gold. The vibration coming from the vault was specific and deliberate, something that had been placed with intention. Hagrid collected a grubby little package from the vault, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper that Hagrid tucked into an inside pocket without explaining, and said not to ask, which Harry hadn't planned to do since it was obviously none of his business. His own vault was several levels above, more accessible, and when Griffook swung the door open, the rush of cool air came out and Harry looked at the mounded gold inside. He stood very still. He had lived in a cupboard. He had worn Dudley's cast-off clothes for a decade. He had eaten what was left of other people's meals, and been given an allowance of essentially nothing, and been told, consistently, that he was a burden. His parents had left him this. He picked up a handful of coins, galleons, Hagrid had explained, and felt the weight of them and set them down carefully. He didn't feel rich exactly. He felt something more complicated, something that he filed away for later, in the folder in his head marked things that deserve proper attention when I have time to give it. He filled a bag with what seemed like a reasonable amount. He was very aware of Hagrid watching him with that complex expression people wear when they're braced for an emotional response they're not sure how to handle. "I'm all right," Harry said, without looking up from the coins. "Thank you for bringing me." "Your mum and dad," Hagrid started. "Worked hard," Harry said. "Or were lucky, or both, I'll find out which." He looked up and met Hagrid's eyes. "I'm all right," he said again, and meant it differently this time, not "I'm fine," but "I am actually all right, you don't need to manage this." Hagrid nodded, swallowed, looked at the ceiling. On the way back up through the tunnels, the cart taking a different route, faster, the track spiraling in a wide helix through a cavern that opened briefly to a view of an underground lake so black it reflected nothing, Griffook looked at Harry sideways. Goblins, Harry had noticed, were extremely good at the sideways look. The kind that said "I am assessing you" without appearing to. "The Potter vaults are old," Griffook said, not volunteering information, just making an observation, testing something. "How old?" Harry asked. "The main vault, not the one we visited today, is one of the 20 founding vaults. It predates the bank." A pause. "We have not had a Potter in to visit in 11 years. Harry looked at him. "Which one is the main vault?" "Vault 1, Griffook said, and there was something in the way he said it that suggested he was watching for a reaction. Harry thought about this. A vault predating the bank itself. He thought about the old Powers book and the word sovereign and the way the storm moved through him with the ease of something returning to its proper place. "I'd like to visit it before I leave," Harry said. Hagrid started. "Oh, I don't know that we have time." "I do," Griffook said, and his voice had something in it now that hadn't been there before. Not warmth exactly. Goblins didn't do warmth as a professional demeanor. Respect maybe. The particular respect of a person who deals in value and has just recognized something worth valuing. "This way, Mr. Potter." Vault 1 was at the absolute bottom of the bank, so far down that the temperature had equalized into a deep, steady cold that felt geological rather than mechanical. The door was not the same as the other vault doors. There was no keyhole, no mechanism Harry could see, just a vast circular door of some dark metal he didn't recognize, surface covered in patterns that might have been decorative or might have been functional or most likely were both. Griffook stood back. "The founding vaults open to blood and intent," he said. "We have not been able to open it in 11 years. Harry stepped forward. He put his hand flat against the door. The patterns lit up. Not gradually, immediately, all at once, gold light pouring into the channels of the design, and the vibration Harry had been feeling all the way down suddenly resolved into a clear, structured note, like a tuning fork being struck. The door swung inward on no visible mechanism. Inside, Harry had expected more gold. There was some in the back, old and tarnished. But what dominated the space was a collection that wasn't money at all. Weapons, some of them, a sword on a stone pedestal, plainly made, no ornamentation, but radiating something that Harry felt in his back teeth. Books, sealed in crystal cases, titles he couldn't read from the doorway. And at the center of the room, on a low plinth, a circlet of plain dark metal, not ornate, not jeweled, just a band wide enough to wear, covered in the same kind of patterns as the door and thrumming with the low, deep note that had started when Harry opened the vault. He walked to it. He picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. The storm moved in him like a tide. He set it back down. He looked around the vault for a long, quiet minute. He picked up one of the books. The crystal case opened when his fingers touched it. No ceremony, just recognition, and read the title, On the Nature of the Marked, being the account of Ignatius Peverell, third son. He tucked it under his arm. He turned around. Hagrid was standing at the doorway looking like he'd been hit gently in the head with something soft but very heavy. Griffook was looking at the lit-up patterns on the vault door with an expression of deep professional interest. "Could you hold this?" Harry said, offering Hagrid the book. Hagrid took it. He opened his mouth and closed it again. "We can come back," Harry said, "when I know more about what I'm looking at." He looked at Griffook. "Thank you, genuinely." Griffook inclined his head, the shallowest possible bow. Coming from a goblin, in Harry's estimation, this was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. They came back up into the light of Diagon Alley, and Harry bought his school things with the methodical attention he brought to anything that mattered. He was measured for robes by a witch named Madame Malkin, who put him next to a blond boy who introduced himself immediately as Draco Malfoy, in the way of someone who expected that name to do work for him. Harry looked at him. Pale, well-dressed, held himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder whether he deserved to take up space. Not cruel, not exactly, not yet, but accustomed to a particular ordering of things and entirely comfortable with that ordering. Harry Potter, Harry said, because there was no reason not to. Draco blinked. It was very quick, a fractional reorganization behind the eyes, the recalibration of someone who had just received unexpected information. Then, so you're real. Father said you would be coming to Hogwarts this year. He said father with a particular capital F weight that told you something about the household. What house do you think you'll be in? I haven't thought about it. Draco seemed to find this odd. I'll be in Slytherin, all my family have been. He said this the way you'd state a law of nature. Gryffindor would be dreadful, my father says. What do you think? Harry asked. Draco paused. Sorry. Not what your father says. What do you think? It was a simple question. Harry asked it with genuine curiosity and no particular edge. Draco Malfoy was, clearly, an intelligent person who had been trained to recite rather than reflect, and Harry found that genuinely interesting in the way you find a locked room interesting. Draco opened his mouth, closed it. A flicker of something, not offense, something more complicated, like a person who has been handed an unfamiliar tool and isn't sure which end to hold. I think Slytherin, he said, finally, because I want to. Good, Harry said. That's better. Draco looked at him for a moment, assessing. We should be friends, he said, and put his hand out. Potter and Malfoy, that's not a bad combination. We might be, Harry said, and shook his hand. We'll see. It wasn't a number, it wasn't a yes. It was what it was, and Draco Malfoy, whatever his faults, was perceptive enough to hear that and file it rather than dismiss it. On the train, Harry found a compartment with a ginger-haired boy who was eating what appeared to be a badly packed corned beef sandwich and trying not to look abandoned by his brothers, who had done exactly that 3 carriages down. Anyone in here? Harry asked. Number I mean no, help yourself. The boy had a scattering of freckles and an open face, the kind that broadcasts everything immediately because it's never really learned not to. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter. Ron choked on his sandwich, coughed, recovered, stared. Really? Generally, yes. Right. Ron stared for another second, made a visible decision to be normal about it, and then pointed at Harry's forehead. Is that sorry? Is that your scar? It is. Does it hurt? Not right now. Wicked, Ron said, and then looked like he wished he'd chosen a different word, and then seemed to decide it was too late to take it back and offered Harry half his sandwich instead. Harry took it. He wasn't hungry, but it was a genuine offer, and those deserved recognition. They talked for most of the first hour, in the circling, testing way of 2 people who might become friends. Ron had 5 brothers, Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, and George, and talked about them with affectionate exasperation, and Harry listened to this with something he might have called envy if he'd been in the habit of envying people, which he wasn't, but he felt the warmth of it, the texture of a life full of people who were yours even when they were annoying. A girl looked into the compartment, bushy brown hair, alert eyes, the decisive energy of someone who is always slightly ahead of whatever's happening and knows it. Have either of you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. No, Ron said. No, Harry agreed. She looked at Harry with the particular attention of someone who has recognized something. Not the scar, she flicked past that quickly, clearly having already decided not to make it the centerpiece of the interaction. Something else. His eyes, maybe, or the way he was sitting, or some quality she couldn't name. Hermione Granger, she said. Harry Potter. I know, she said, but not in the awestruck way, in the way of someone who has done their research. I've read about you. Quite a lot, actually. The accounts vary considerably depending on the source. She looked at him with frank assessment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? She considered this seriously. More, overwhelmed. The day's not over, Harry said. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. She came and sat down, and they found Neville's towed 3 carriages along, and by the time the train pulled into Hogsmeade in the dark and the cold and the wide autumn sky, Harry had 2 things he hadn't had that morning. A friend with red hair who'd offered him half his lunch, and a friend with brown hair who'd laughed at something he'd said and meant it. He was aware that this was significant. He kept the awareness quiet, in the way of someone who knows that looking directly at new things can sometimes frighten them away. The boats across the lake were Hagrid's domain, 4 to a boat, the great dark water spreading out around them and the castle lit up above like something that had been there since before memory. Harry sat in the prow of his boat and felt the lake, not electricity down here, but something broader, older, the deep magnetic signature of an enormous body of still water. Something lived at the bottom of the lake. He could feel its bioelectricity distantly, complicated and not human. He didn't mention this. It was a castle. That first look, walking up from the boats through the vast wooden doors into the entrance hall with its torches and its soaring stone ceiling, Harry catalogued it with his particular attention and found it genuinely extraordinary. The way the old Powers book had been extraordinary. The way Vault 1 had been extraordinary. Dense with history, built for purpose, alive in the way that old things full of intention are alive. He could also feel immediately, standing in the entrance hall, before anyone had done anything, that the castle was warded in extremely complex ways. Layers of protective enchantment, some of them so old they barely registered as spell work anymore, just baked into the stone, and threaded through all of it very finely, a monitoring system. The castle was watching. Harry found this interesting rather than threatening. He watched back. The deputy headmistress, Professor McGonagall, sharp-eyed, straight-backed, with the energy of someone who ran things properly and expected others to meet that standard, gathered the first years in a side chamber and explained the house system. House points, 4 houses, the year-end prize. Harry listened. Ron leaned over and whispered something about which house was which, and Harry listened to that too. The ghosts arrived, which startled most of the first years comprehensively. Harry watched them with interest. Their bioelectricity was completely absent, which made sense, but they had something else, a faint charge that wasn't exactly physical. Residual. Like the electromagnetic trace, a very powerful emotion could leave in a space. The ghost in the rough introduced himself as nearly headless Nick and seemed to take a liking to Harry for no discernible reason. Harry shook his hand. You couldn't, obviously, but he made the gesture and the ghost appreciated it and said it was very nice to meet him, and meant it. Then they were filed into the Great Hall. Harry had read about it. He had not expected the actual scale of it. The bewitched ceiling opened to the night sky. His sky, he could feel the clouds moving across it far above, and the 4 long tables and the staff table at the head with professors in a row, and the whole thing lit by thousands of candles floating in midair. He kept his face calm. He felt the wonder privately, the way he kept most things. The sorting hat sat on a stool at the front of the hall. It was old and battered and looked unprepossessing, but it sang a song that was genuinely clever. Harry gave it that, and then the names started. Granger Hermione went to Gryffindor to applause. She sat down with the expression of someone who had considered all possible outcomes and was satisfied with this one. Longbottom Neville, a round-faced boy who'd lost the toad, went to Gryffindor also, to considerably more relieved applause from the boy himself. Malfoy Draco barely touched the stool before the hat shouted Slytherin. Draco walked to his table with the easy confidence of a foregone conclusion. He caught Harry's eye across the hall as he sat down, and something passed between them that wasn't quite a nod. Potter Harry, the hall went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a ceremony moving forward, but the held-breath quiet of 500 people simultaneously adjusting to something. Harry walked to the stool and sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes. Darkness. The hat's voice in his head, dry and old and genuinely interested. Well, this is unusual. I expect it is, Harry thought back. Usually I have to dig a little. You've done quite a lot of the work for me. A pause. You know what you are, more or less. The storm-marked are not sorted often. Every few centuries. Last time was something that felt like the hat riffling through its own extensive memory. 1743. A girl from the Orkneys. She ended up in Ravenclaw and was insufferable about it. A beat. You do well there. The intelligence is genuine. So is the Slytherin quality. You understand power. You're not afraid of it. You think strategically. I'm not strategic, Harry thought. I'm just paying attention. That's the most strategic thing anyone's ever said to me. The hat seemed amused, which was strange. Harry hadn't expected a hat to have a sense of humor. Gryffindor, then. You know why? Because I'm brave. Because when you were 8 years old, alone in a field, and lightning hit you 3 times, you didn't run. You stayed. Another pause, and this one felt less like assessment and more like something else, something closer to respect. Most people who get that much power, the first thing they do is protect themselves from it. You opened your hands. Harry was quiet inside for a moment. One thing, the hat said. The school has not seen something like you before. Not the magic it knows. The other thing, be patient with them. I'll be patient, Harry said. I won't be small. No, the hat agreed. I didn't think you would. And then aloud to the Great Hall. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it to Professor McGonagall, and walked to his table with his head up. He sat down next to a set of identical red-haired twins, Fred and George Weasley, Ron's brothers, who immediately introduced themselves by grabbing his hand simultaneously and saying, "Welcome to the House of the Brave," in exact unison, which Harry suspected they'd practiced. Ron sat down a few places along, having also been sorted Gryffindor, with an expression of enormous relief. He caught Harry's eye and Harry gave him one solid nod and Ron grinned, that guileless, wide grin that was just Ron, unpackaged, and turned back to the table. Hermione sat across from Harry, already studying the table arrangement with the interest of someone cataloging things. She looked up when he sat down. Gryffindor was my first choice, she said, which Harry understood was her way of saying she was pleased they were together. Mine too, he said, which surprised her, because she'd assumed from his composure that he wasn't the type to have preferences. The realization that he did, quiet ones, genuinely held, visibly recalibrated something in how she was looking at him. Dumbledore spoke. Harry watched him from across the hall, old, extraordinarily powerful, the magical signature coming off him so complex and layered it was like looking at very old music, something built up over decades of practice and intent. He spoke about the third-floor corridor with the casual authority of someone who believed in informed warnings, which Harry appreciated. He spoke about the start of term. He looked at Harry once during the feast with calm blue eyes that said many things without saying any of them. Harry held his gaze for a moment and looked away first, because looking away first was a choice he could afford to make. The feast was spectacular. Harry ate properly for the first time in recent memory and did not think too hard about that, because the folder labeled things that deserve proper attention was already quite full. He talked to Fred and George, who were in third year and immediately invested in determining whether Harry could take a joke, he could, and whether he could dish one back, he could, and who conferred quietly between themselves after this determination and told him gravely that he had passed an examination more important than any the school would set him. He talked to Hermione about the castle's architecture because she'd read about it and he was curious about the structural history behind the magical wards he could feel. She was startled that he was asking about that specifically, then delighted, in the way she was delighted by anything that turned out to be more interesting than expected. He didn't talk much. He listened, which was better. Late in the feast, something made him look up. Not a sound, a change in the electrical field nearby, something tightening, becoming focused. He looked toward the staff table and found himself meeting the eyes of the defense against the dark arts professor. Quirrell, someone had said his name was, the one in the purple turban. He had a slight, nervous look about him, a tremor in his hands, but his electrical field was wrong, not wrong in the way of illness or fear. Wrong in the way of a signal with interference, something layered over the top of what should be there, something that didn't belong to Quirrell and knew it and was very carefully managing how much of itself it showed. Harry looked at him for 3 long seconds, reading the shape of it. Then Quirrell looked away first, quickly, with an odd jerk of the head. Harry went back to his dinner. He filed the information in a separate folder from the others, one he didn't have a label for yet, but that he would return to. After the feast, the prefect, Percy Weasley, Ron's brother, with the energy of someone who had found a calling in procedure, led the first years up the moving staircases and through the portrait-guarded entrance to the Gryffindor common room. The fat lady demanded a password. Percy gave it. The portrait swung open and the warmth and the firelight came out. Harry stood in the Gryffindor common room and looked around it, the battered armchairs and the wide windows and the wooden tables and the older students already spreading out with parchment and chess sets, and felt something very specific. Not home, not yet, he was too careful with that word, but something adjacent to it. A room that had held other people's ordinary lives for a very long time. He could do something with that. Ron appeared at his elbow. "Good day," he asked, with the friendly bluntness of someone who decided to skip the formalities. "Surprisingly," Harry said, which was honest. "Brilliant." Ron looked around the common room with the comfortable satisfaction of someone who'd always known this was where he was going. "Fred says the dormitory beds are decent except the one by the window rattles. I'm going to claim the one by the window because I like weather." "Take it," Harry said. "I'll be fine anywhere." Ron looked at him. "You won't rattle. The window, I mean storms and all that." "I'll be fine," Harry said, with a smile that Ron didn't quite know what to do with but filed as probably a good thing. That night in the dormitory, after the other boys in their year, Ron, Neville, Dean Thomas, and Seamus Finnegan had all settled down. Harry lay on his back in the dark with his hands folded on his chest and listened to the castle. The wards breathed. The deep vibration of Vault 1 was a memory now, but the same family of thing ran through the bedrock under Hogwarts, old and patient and vast. Far above, through the windows, through the stone, through all that distance, he could feel his sky. He let the storm breathe out, just a little, just enough, and somewhere over the lake, lightning walked the clouds in silence, brilliant and blue-white and completely his, and he watched it through the stone ceiling and the sky and felt, for the first time in his life, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He slept without dreaming, which for Harry was the definition of peace. Chapter 3, Storm Season. The thing about Hogwarts was that it had a rhythm, and Harry learned it the way he learned everything, by paying attention until the pattern revealed itself. Breakfast at 7:30. Classes starting at 9, cycling through a timetable that mixed practical spellwork with theory, history with application. Lunch, more classes. Dinner, the long evening stretch of the common room, homework spreading across tables, the fire burning low by 10. Then the dormitory, the dark, the castle breathing its old breath around them. Within that rhythm, Harry found his own. He was up before anyone else, down to the grounds in the early morning, when the dew was still on the grass, and the lake was flat and gray, and no one was watching. He'd float 2 feet off the ground and run through whatever he was thinking about: electrical theory, the old Powers book, the Peveril account he'd brought from Vault 1, while the sun came up orange over the forbidden forest. Then back inside before anyone was awake enough to notice. He wasn't hiding. He just didn't see the point in performing. Classes were mostly fine. Charms was immediately engaging because the theory of wandwork turned out to be, at its roots, a theory of directed intention, and Harry had 3 years of directed intention practice behind him. And Professor Flitwick, small and round and genuinely enthusiastic, was delighted by Harry's early competence, even though Harry had to carefully modulate his output because the first time he'd tried the Wingardium Leviosa charm, he'd sent the feather through the ceiling with enough force that it embedded in the stone above. Excellent enthusiasm, Flitwick had squeaked, while pieces of stone drifted down. But perhaps a touch lighter, Mr. Potter. Sorry, Harry said and meant it, and did it gently the second time. The feather lifted in a long, smooth arc and stayed where he put it. Hermione, across the table, had watched the ceiling incident with wide eyes and then the controlled follow-up with narrowed ones. She didn't say anything until after class, and then what she said was, "How did you do the second one without a wand motion?" "I forgot the wand motion," Harry said honestly. "You can't just the theory requires. The theory requires the intent to be clear and directed," Harry said. "The wand motion is a focusing aid. If the intent's clear enough on its own, the motion is optional." He paused. "At least for me. I'm not saying you should try it without, you've only just started." Hermione made an extremely specific expression, the one where she was deeply annoyed by something and deeply interested in it at the same time, and wrote something in her notes. "I want to discuss this properly later," she said. "Fine by me," Harry said. They had that discussion 3 days later in the library, which became something of a regular fixture. Hermione would identify something that didn't match the theory as presented. Harry would offer his intuitive framework. Hermione would argue with it on the basis of what the book said. Harry would go and find what the books actually said rather than what she'd paraphrased, and they would end up somewhere more accurate than either of them had started. It was genuinely good. It was the first time Harry had had someone to think with. Transfiguration was Professor McGonagall's domain, and McGonagall herself was the most interesting professor in Harry's estimation, not because she was the warmest, but because she was the most honest. She taught with the precision of someone who didn't believe in softening information, who assumed you could handle the real version of things, and would tell you clearly if you'd gotten something wrong. Harry respected this immediately and deeply. She also turned her desk into a pig and back on the first day to demonstrate that transfiguration was serious business, which Harry found genuinely impressive. The quality of the control involved, that wasn't just directed intention, that was intention combined with extremely sophisticated internal visualization, holding the target state in mind while maintaining the bridge between states. He thought about it all the way to lunch. His first transfiguration practical, he turned his matchstick into a needle immediately and correctly, and then, because he was curious about the edge of the thing, tried to take it further and got a steel sewing needle that then began to replicate, producing 4 more needles before he stopped it. McGonagall looked at him over her spectacles for a long moment. "Can you reverse all 5? "Yes," he did. 5 matchsticks. She looked at them, picked one up, examined it. "Extra reading," she said, which coming from McGonagall was clearly the highest available praise. "I'll leave a list of texts with Madame Pince. Start with Dumbledore's 1971 paper on recursive transformation." "Thank you, Professor." She gave him one more look, not warm but something, and moved on to the next student. Potions was Snape, and Snape was something else entirely. Harry had felt him the moment he walked into the dungeons, the way his electrical field moved, coiled and tightly managed, radiating something that was partly contempt and partly something older and harder that Harry didn't have a clean name for. He swept into the room in black robes with the controlled theatricality of someone who had refined his entrance over many years and knew exactly what effect it produced. He started with questions. Bezoar, aconite, monkshood, the difference between wolfsbane, testing them. Looking for gaps, most of the class shifted uncomfortably. Harry waited. Potter. His voice had a particular quality, dry and precise and with an edge underneath like a blade inside a sheath. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry considered this, not because he didn't know, but because he was mapping the question against its intent. Snape wasn't asking to test knowledge, he was asking to establish a dynamic. To make the famous Harry Potter look ignorant in front of his classmates, which would serve several purposes Snape clearly had. Harry answered anyway, because he knew and there was no point in pretending otherwise. Draught of Living Death, it's one of the most powerful sleep potions known. A fractional pause. Where would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar, a goat's stomach? What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Nothing, they're the same plant, also called aconite. Snape's expression didn't change, but something in his field did, a sharp flicker of something Harry couldn't immediately categorize. Not anger, not pleasure, something more complex, like a person recalculating. It seems fame isn't entirely unearned, Snape said, the words precise and clearly meant to sting. Though I doubt very much that Mr. Potter opened a book to learn any of this. Harry looked at him steadily. I did open a book, Professor. Several, actually. I find books useful. He kept his voice level and his expression neutral, not challenging, not apologetic, just accurate. The class was very quiet. Snape held the silence for 3 seconds, Harry counted, and then turned away to begin the lesson proper. He spent the rest of the class making the instruction more complex than necessary and making pointed comments about technique. And Harry followed the instructions precisely and produced a perfect bowl cure potion on the first attempt, and said nothing about this, which was harder than it sounded, because Hermione kept looking at his cauldron and back at hers with the expression of someone doing a comparison she wasn't entirely happy with. Your potion's perfect too, Harry told her quietly. Mine has a slightly murky quality, yours doesn't, she said, with professional displeasure. Stirring order. You went clockwise 4 times when it should have been 3. She stared at him. How did you see that from over here? I wasn't watching you, I just felt. He stopped. This was the kind of sentence that opened complicated conversations. I just noticed the color change, he finished, which was approximately true. She would have pushed it, but Snape appeared at their bench at that moment, examined their cauldrons, made a non-committal sound about Hermione's and nothing at all about Harry's, and swept away. The non-committal sound was, Harry suspected, the closest Snape could manage to a compliment, and he filed it without satisfaction or resentment. The Cold War between them was real but unspoken, and Harry had decided from the first day that he would not start it and would not end it prematurely and would not let it affect his learning. Snape was an excellent potions teacher, difficult and demanding, and inclined to use the classroom as a theater for his personal feelings, but technically excellent. Harry was willing to receive excellent teaching from a person who disliked him. This had been his entire school career so far. Quidditch came into his life through Oliver Wood. Wood was the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, a 6th year with the energy of someone who had identified his purpose in life early and organized everything around it. He found Harry in the common room on the 4th evening of term and sat down across from him with the directness of a man with a mission. You're Harry Potter, Wood said. I am, Harry agreed. Professor McGonagall says you're, and I want to be precise about this, the most naturally gifted student she's seen attempt a broom, and she saw you hover for about 3 seconds during the tour of the grounds before you noticed she was watching and put yourself back down. Harry was quiet for a moment. She saw that, she did, Wood leaned forward. I'm the Quidditch captain, I need a seeker. The position's been open since Charlie Weasley graduated, and we've been struggling, and he stopped himself, reining in. Will you try out? Harry thought about flying, not brooms, his kind, the storm-assisted kind, and how much he'd missed it since arriving at Hogwarts where there were too many people to do it unseen. He thought about brooms, which he hadn't tried yet. He thought about a fast-moving game played 100 feet in the air. Yes, he said. The tryout lasted 9 minutes. Harry had never been on a broom before, which he decided not to mention, because Wood was already nervous, and there was no useful purpose served by adding to that. He mounted the school broom in the gray early morning, felt the magical propulsion system through the wood. It was rougher than Stormlift, more mechanical, a contained magical output that you steered with body weight and grip rather than pure intent, and made 2 adjustments in his mind and shot off the ground. Wood made a sound below him that was approximately 60% awe and 40% personal vindication. Harry flew the broom the way he flew in a storm, with his body and his attention and his weight, making course changes with the fluency of something he'd been doing for years. He caught the practice snitch, a small gold-winged sphere that moved with the unpredictable intelligence of a very fast insect, 4 times in 6 minutes, the 4th time rolling into a dive from 60 feet up and pulling out at ankle height without apparent concern. Wood was incoherent with happiness for approximately 2 minutes. Then he recovered and began talking tactics, and Harry listened to all of it, because tactics were interesting and Wood knew what he was talking about. "First match is against Slytherin," Wood said, walking back to the castle. "Flint's their captain and he plays dirty. You need to watch the keeper and not the snitch," Harry said. "The keeper's body will tell you where the snitch is before you can see it directly, because they'll be watching it instead of you." Wood stopped walking and looked at him. "How do you know that? How do people play chess well?" Harry said. "You watch the other player, not the board." Wood stared at him for a moment, then made a note on his clipboard. "Right," he said. "Yes, that's exactly right." He wrote it down with the dedicated energy of someone who plans to use everything useful he encounters. "I like you, Potter." "Good," Harry said. "I need a broom that isn't a school broom. We can request one from, I'll sort it," Harry said. He wrote to Gringotts that evening, and 3 days later a Nimbus 2000 arrived by owl post during breakfast, causing a significant interruption to the morning's food consumption as everyone in the hall craned to look at the long parcel making its way down the Gryffindor table. Ron unwrapped one end before Harry could stop him, saw what it was, and made a sound only achievable by a 12-year-old Quidditch obsessive confronted by a Nimbus 2000 at close range. "How did you?" Ron started. "Ordered it," Harry said. "Just ordered it. A Nimbus 2000. Is there another way to get one?" Ron looked at him, then at the broom, then back. "My family could buy one of these if we saved up for about forever," he said, and he said it without self-pity, just as a statement, the kind that was honest because there was no point in pretending otherwise. Harry held the broom out. "Fly it first. Tell me if it handles well." "I can't fly I'm asking for a technical assessment. You know more about brooms than I do. I haven't been on one before this week." Ron took the broom. He looked at it for a long moment with the expression of someone receiving something they'd wanted very much for a very long time and hadn't expected anyone to notice. "Yeah, all right," he said quietly. After dinner, they flew together that evening on the pitch, Ron on the Nimbus and Harry on a school broom, and Ron was a genuinely good flyer, comfortable and confident in the air in the way of someone who'd grown up on brooms, and gave Harry an honest technical breakdown of the Nimbus's response rates that was more useful than any spec sheet would have been. Afterward he handed it back and said it was the best broom he'd ever flown. Harry thanked him. Ron said he hadn't done anything. "You told me the truth about it," Harry said. "That's something." Ron was quiet for a moment, then said, with the directness of someone who doesn't do things halfway, "I'm glad we're in the same house." "Me too," Harry said, and meant it entirely. It was in the 3rd week that Draco Malfoy became a problem. Harry had been aware of him, peripherally, the blonde head at the Slytherin table, the occasional glance across the Great Hall, the quality of attention from someone who has put you in a category of things to monitor. He hadn't been avoiding him or seeking him out. They existed in the same building, and had acknowledged each other twice in passing with the neutral ease of people whose relationship was still defining itself. The incident happened on a Thursday afternoon. Neville Longbottom had a remembrall, a glass ball that turned red when you'd forgotten something, which for Neville meant it was permanently crimson, and Draco took it. Not violently, just took it, while Neville was distracted, with the casual entitlement of someone who takes things because they can. He was standing with 2 large, slow-looking friends, Crabbe and Goyle, and he tossed the remembrall up and caught it, and looked at Neville with the specific expression of someone enjoying an advantage they haven't earned. Neville, to his credit, asked for it back. His voice shook, but he asked. Draco smiled. He was good-looking when he smiled and knew it made the smile more effective as a weapon. "I don't think so. Maybe I'll keep it as a Malfoy," Harry said. He hadn't moved from where he was standing 6 feet away. He hadn't raised his voice. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been a waste of energy here, and it would have been the wrong signal. What he was clear. Draco looked at him. The smile didn't leave his face, but it changed, became something more careful. "Potter." "Give it back," Harry said. Not a request, not a threat. A fact slightly ahead of itself. "We're having a conversation," Draco said. "This doesn't concern." Harry looked at him with the particular quality of attention he usually reserved for electrical systems he was considering engaging with. Calm, measuring, unhurried. Draco gave the remembrall back to Neville. He did it quickly, dropping it into Neville's hands without taking his eyes off Harry, and the speed of it was the interesting part. the instinctive response to something in Harry's stillness, the way animals respond to weather changing. Then Draco straightened his robes and said, "Slytherin doesn't associate with blood traitors and mudbloods," which was clearly for the benefit of Crabbe and Goyle more than anyone else. Harry looked at him for a moment longer. "You should be careful," he said, "with words you've borrowed but haven't examined." Draco's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" "No," Harry said. "It's advice. You're more intelligent than the people you're quoting. Act like it." He walked away. He heard Draco say something sharp to Crabbe and Goyle behind him, heard the edge in it that wasn't anger exactly but something adjacent, something that happened when someone had said a thing you couldn't immediately argue with. He didn't look back. Neville was at his elbow, clutching the Remembrall. "Thank you," he said breathlessly. "Don't thank me. Next time, hold your ground on your own. You asked him first, that was right. Don't stop doing that because it didn't work immediately." Neville looked at him with the expression of someone receiving unexpected instruction. "Oh," he said. "Right, yes." Harry could feel that Neville meant it and would try, which was all you could ask. Flying lessons were Madame Hooch's territory, and the incident with Neville's Remembrall played out differently than it might have because the confrontation with Draco had already happened. When Neville mounted his broom incorrectly and rocketed upward and fell and broke his wrist, Harry watched him be taken to the hospital wing and then turned to find Draco holding the Remembrall up again, clearly planning to throw it somewhere difficult as an encore performance. Harry looked at the Remembrall. He looked at Draco. He extended his hand, and the Remembrall, which was made of glass and had metal fittings and was therefore not entirely immune to his influence, slid out of Draco's grip and across the air in a smooth arc and landed in Harry's palm. The class went very still. Draco stared at him. "You can't, that's against the rules," Harry said. "Madame Hooch left us strict instructions." He set the Remembrall on the ground near Neville's abandoned broom. "Neither of us should be doing magic unsupervised." The absolute straight face with which he said this, given that he had just moved an object through the air without a wand, caused Hermione, who had seen the whole thing and was currently processing about 4 separate reactions simultaneously, to make a strangled sound that might have been a laugh dying in transit. Ron, who had seen it too, turned away and appeared to be examining his broom's bristles with extraordinary focus. Draco said nothing. He mounted his broom and stayed on the ground for the rest of the lesson with the careful composure of someone managing a situation they haven't fully characterized yet. That evening in the common room, Hermione cornered Harry at the table near the window. "The Remembrall," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "You moved it." "I did, without a wand, from about 6 feet away." She had her arms crossed, and her expression was the one that meant she had already thought about this a great deal and wanted honesty more than comfort. That's not standard magic. What you did in Charms, the sealing thing that could have been excess power through a wand, but that was no wand at all." "I know," Harry said. "Are you going to explain it?" He considered this. He'd given some thought to how much to share and with whom and when, and he decided that Hermione deserved the full version because she would work it out regardless, and because she would be more useful as someone who understood than as someone who was guessing. And because, though he was still careful with the word, she was his friend. "You've read about old powers," he said. "Pre-wand traditions, the elemental marked. It's in the restricted section, but there are references in the standard magical history texts." She had read about it. Of course she had. He watched her connect it, the way she connected things, rapidly, accurately, with the genuine intellectual pleasure of a pattern resolving. Her eyes went slightly wider. "You're storm-marked," she said. "Yes." "Since when?" "Since I was 8, she absorbed this." "How strong?" She stopped herself. "Revised." "What can you do?" he told her. Not everything. He kept the vault and the Peveril account to himself for now, partly because he was still digesting it, but the core of it. The lightning, the 3 years of practice, the weather, the flight, the electrical sense that let him feel bioelectric fields. She listened without interrupting, which was notable, because Hermione Granger was not constitutionally a non-interrupting person. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You've been doing this for 3 years alone, without anyone knowing." "Yes, I want to say that's irresponsible, but I think the better word is isolated." She looked at him with the clear-eyed honesty that was becoming one of the things Harry most valued about her. "You could have been hurt." "I have a fairly high tolerance for electrical discharge," Harry said. "That's not what I meant." He knew that wasn't what she meant. He didn't say anything. "Right," Hermione said after a moment. "Well, now I know." She opened her Charms textbook with the decisive energy of someone organizing themselves after unexpected information. "I have questions, many, but not all tonight. Tonight I have an essay due." "I have questions too," Harry said. About the formal magical theory, the wand tradition. I want to understand the complete system. Tomorrow, she said, and began writing and then stopped writing immediately. Harry, the electrical sense, bioelectric fields. She didn't look up. Can you sense everyone, all the time? Background, like ambient noise, I tune it down unless there's something specific. And right now, you're interested, Harry said. And you're deciding whether to be frightened of something and deciding not to be. And there's something underneath both of those that's satisfied, I think, that you know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up and held his gaze for a deliberate 3 seconds. Good, she said. I prefer knowing things. She went back to her essay. Harry smiled and opened his own books. He felt something else from her direction, something small and quiet and not quite nameable, and he left it alone the way you leave small fires alone when they're burning clean. October moved in with the cold, and with it the steady rhythm of life at Hogwarts took on the particular texture of winter approaching, the smell of wood smoke and the early dark, and the way the lake went a deeper shade of gray each morning. Harry's magic was growing in the way that things grown on a solid foundation grow, not explosively, but steadily, each new skill built on genuine understanding. He could feel that it was going to be very large. He kept this observation to himself. In the middle of October, Quirrell's attention sharpened. Harry had been aware of it since the feast, the wrong quality interference in Quirrell's field, the thing that wasn't Quirrell layered underneath. He'd been patient with it, watching, cataloging. Quirrell's defense class was deliberately poor, information given in the wrong order, important things underemphasized, a quality of misdirection that was too consistent to be incompetence. Whoever was managing Quirrell was keeping defense against the dark arts students ignorant, which was interesting. Then, in the 3rd week of October, Quirrell began staying late after dinner on Thursdays. Harry didn't follow him immediately. He sat with this information for 3 days, considering it from different angles. Then on the 4th Thursday, he walked to the 3rd-floor corridor, the one Dumbledore had mentioned, the one that was forbidden, and stood outside the locked door and listened. Not with his ears. The electrical interference coming through the door was massive. Multiple enchantments, layered and complex, and underneath them, something alive. Something very large, with a bioelectric field the size of a small building and a pulse rate that was distinctly not mammalian. He heard footsteps approaching from the far staircase, turned, and walked back the way he'd come at a normal pace. Quirrell rounded the corner 30 seconds later, stopped when he saw Harry, and the thing underneath his field surged. Mr. Potter, Quirrell said. In the stuttering performance Harry had identified 2 weeks ago as exactly that, a performance. What are you, lost? Harry said pleasantly. I went wrong on the 4th floor. They really do all look alike. He gestured at the corridor. They were both standing in with the casual ease of someone who has already decided what he's saying. I was just heading back down. He walked past Quirrell. He felt the thing underneath Quirrell's field watching him the entire time, pressing up against Quirrell's skin like something trying to see through a window. Harry went down to the common room and sat in the chair nearest the fire and looked at the flames for a while. Whatever was under the 3rd-floor corridor was big and guarded and alive. Quirrell, or rather what was writing Quirrell, had an interest in it that went past academic. And there was something about the quality of the interference Harry felt from Quirrell that he was finally ready to name. He'd felt it before, in the old Powers book, in the Peveril account. The particular signature of something divided, a consciousness operating in a body not its own, the electromagnetic dissonance of 2 minds sharing one nervous system. He'd read about this. He went to the library the next morning before breakfast and found the restricted section reference in a footnote in treatise on dark spirits and incomplete deaths, and read it 3 times, and then sat back in his chair and looked at the library ceiling. He thought about the name the Wizarding World had given to the thing that had killed his parents. He thought about the 3rd-floor corridor. He thought about Vault 713 and the small brown paper package Hagrid had collected, and the thing inside it that had radiated deliberate intention from 50 feet away. He thought about Quirrell's interference field, the quality of the consciousness underneath it. Old, angry, patient, damaged, fractured, genuinely, in a way that was structural rather than circumstantial. He pulled out a piece of parchment and his quill. He wrote, "What is in Vault 713?" He wrote, "What is it protecting?" He wrote, "Who else knows?" And at the bottom, in smaller letters, "What does he want with it?" He folded the parchment and put it in the inside pocket of his robes and walked to breakfast. The great hall was loud and warm and smelled of toast and eggs, and Ron was already there with a bowl of porridge and a complaint about the charm's essay length, and Hermione was correcting something in the margin of her notes with the focused displeasure of someone who has found an error in their own work, which was the Hermione Granger equivalent of a personal tragedy. Harry sat down between them. "You look like you've been thinking hard," Ron said. "I have," Harry said. "About what?" Harry picked up the marmalade. "Lots of things," he said, which was true, and poured his orange juice, and watched Quirrell take his seat at the staff table at the far end of the hall, and felt the wrongness of him from 50 feet away, clear and specific as a radio station broadcasting on the wrong frequency. He would need to know more before he could do anything, and he was patient. He had been patient for 3 years in a cupboard under a staircase, and patience, of all the things the storm had taught him, was the one that had never failed. He ate his breakfast and talked to Ron about Quidditch tactics and helped Hermione identify the error in her notes, which turned out to be a transcription mistake rather than a conceptual one, which improved her mood considerably. Outside, through the castle windows, the sky was doing what Harry had asked it to, holding dry and clear, a particular sharp autumn blue, and he could feel it up there, vast and his, patient as he was. He let it stay clear for the day. There would be weather enough later. Chapter 4: The Deep Places. Halloween at Hogwarts was loud in the way that celebrations are loud when the people running them have access to magic. The great hall decorated with 1,000 live bats, jack-o'-lanterns the size of carriage wheels floating at ceiling height, Dumbledore having conjured real ghosts of flame above the candles that burned orange and blue without heat. The feast was enormous, even by Hogwarts standards, which had already recalibrated Harry's understanding of the word enormous. It was a lot. Harry ate and watched and let the noise wash over him. The thing with Quirrell had been sitting in his chest for 2 weeks like a stone, not uncomfortable exactly, but present, demanding periodic attention. He'd been building his picture carefully. The restricted section reference he'd found had given him the framework, a piece of a fractured soul, inhabiting a host body, looking for a way back to physical form, looking for something that could provide it, the Philosopher's Stone. He'd worked that out on the Thursday after the library visit, sitting in the corridor outside Flitwick's classroom, waiting for the lesson before his to finish, doing nothing in particular with his hands, and letting his mind run the available information until it resolved into a shape. Vault 713, Gringotts, whatever had been in that vault before Hagrid collected it was now at Hogwarts, under the third-floor corridor. Behind the locked door, he'd stood outside and felt the massive living thing behind. The stone, the actual Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel's stone, the thing that made gold and more critically the elixir of life, was sitting underneath Hogwarts, and Voldemort, what was left of him, was in the building trying to get to it. He'd told Hermione and Ron 2 days after that. Their reactions had been characteristically themselves. Hermione had gone very still for approximately 4 seconds, and then said, "Are you certain?" in the tone of someone hoping she could find an error to argue with. Ron had said bloody hell and then leaned forward and said, "Tell me everything," and then when Harry had said bloody hell a second time with more conviction. They'd argued for the better part of an hour about what to do. Hermione's position was that they should tell Dumbledore. Ron's position, evolving rapidly, was that they should tell Dumbledore and also probably have a plan of their own in case something went wrong with telling Dumbledore. Harry's position was that he wanted more information before he told anyone anything, because he'd grown up in a household where powerful adults used information as leverage, and his instinct was to understand the full shape of a problem before putting it in someone else's hands. "Dumbledore isn't the Dursleys," Hermione said. "No," Harry agreed, "but he put the stone here, in a school. With a single locked door, and a guard that a first year with a harp can put to sleep, apparently, if Hagrid's story about how Fluffy works is accurate. Either he's made a mistake or this is a trap, and I want to know which before I walk up to his office and tell him what I know." Hermione had been quiet for a moment and then said reluctantly that this was not an unreasonable position. Ron said he personally thought it was entirely reasonable, and also that the 3-headed dog was called Fluffy, and that was somehow the most Hagrid thing he'd ever heard. So they'd waited. They gathered information. Harry watched Quirrell. Hermione read everything she could find about the Philosopher's Stone, which was significant because nearly everything had been written by people who didn't believe it was real. So the actual useful information was in the gaps between lines. Ron, who had grown up in a household where practical magical knowledge was as common as other families' cooking tips, contributed things the books didn't have, the way wizard space enchantments worked, what common protective spells looked like from the outside when you walked through them, what a fully triggered magical trap felt like when it went off, which he knew because Fred and George had tested one on him in his 3rd year. By Halloween, Harry felt like he had most of the relevant information. He had a theory about what was guarding the stone below Fluffy, based on what he could feel through the floor of the third-floor corridor and what Hermione had found about protective enchantment patterns. He had a very clear picture of what Quirrell wanted and what he was capable of. He was getting close to deciding what to do with all of it, and then the troll walked into the Great Hall. It didn't walk in during the feast. It walked in at the end, or rather, Quirrell ran in during dessert, turbaned and gasping, with the particular quality of panic that Harry clocked immediately as performed. The real Quirrell was in there somewhere, layers down, but what Harry felt from him was not the clean electricity of genuine fear. It was staged. The troll in the dungeon announcement was a diversion, clearly designed to create chaos while something else happened somewhere in the castle. The hall erupted. Prefects began shouting about houses and routes. McGonagall was on her feet, face tight. Dumbledore's voice cut through, steady and enormous, directing the evacuation. Harry stood up with everyone else and moved toward the Gryffindor column, and then he thought about Hermione. She wasn't at the feast. She hadn't been at dinner. He'd noticed her absence and assumed she'd gone to the library, because she often did, and hadn't thought more about it because Hogwarts was a safe place. Except tonight it wasn't, or not entirely, because Quirrell had let a mountain troll in, and Harry knew exactly what a mountain troll's bioelectric field felt like because he'd read about them, and he was quite good at extrapolating from information to signal, and he could feel, distantly but clearly, something massive and slow and angry moving through the lower corridors of the castle, moving toward the girls' bathrooms on the second floor, where Hermione went to avoid the common room when she was upset about something, which she had been this afternoon, because Ron had said something careless about her showing off in charms, and she had held it together until she left, and then Harry had felt through the ambient sense exactly when she stopped holding it together, 3 corridors away, and had made a mental note to have a word with Ron about it, and had not yet had that word. He stopped walking. Ron was beside him. Their column was moving. In 40 seconds he'd be around the corner and committed to the route up to Gryffindor Tower, and Hermione was somewhere with a troll between her and safety. "Hermione," he said. Ron looked at him. Ron's face was open and easily read even without the electrical sense, and what Harry saw there was comprehension arriving and immediately rearranging itself into decision. "Yeah," Ron said, obviously, as if they'd had the conversation already. They split from the column without announcing it. The corridors below the Great Hall were empty, everyone moving up, not down, and Harry moved fast through them, not running but close. He could feel the troll. It was on the second floor already, moving slowly because trolls moved slowly but with a kind of implacable directional certainty, like geology in motion. He could feel Hermione too, her bioelectric field, small and human and tight with the specific signature of someone in a contained space, trying to be very still. The bathroom door was at the end of the corridor. The troll was in the corridor. Harry turned the corner and looked at it. Mountain trolls were 12 feet tall, which Harry had known intellectually, but knowing something and standing 30 feet from it were different categories of experience. It had a low, heavy skull and a club the size of a young tree, and it moved with the lumbering certainty of something that had never needed to be afraid of anything. It smelled like something had died inside something else that had also died. It hadn't noticed them yet. It was facing the bathroom door, where Harry could feel Hermione pressed against the far wall inside. Ron picked up a discarded torch from a wall bracket and threw it at the troll's head, which was brave and somewhat impractical, given that the torch bounced off the troll's skull with a clunk that achieved nothing except alerting it to their presence. The troll turned. Harry felt its bioelectric field up close for the first time, and it was simple. Not stupid exactly, but simple the way a force of nature is simple, the way a landslide has direction without intention. It registered them as small and interesting and raised its club. Harry raised his hand. He'd thought briefly about using a wand. He had his wand. It was in his pocket. But wand work would have required finding the right spell and the right incantation and the right technique, and he had something faster. He put his hand up and pushed a charge through the air between himself and the troll, not a bolt, not enough to kill it, but enough, and the spark hit the troll in the chest and ground it out through its feet into the stone floor. The troll stopped moving, every muscle locked. It was not unconscious. It was experiencing, for what Harry suspected was the first time in its life, something it could not simply hit with a club. Harry walked up to it. The troll looked at him with small, confused eyes. From this close, the wrongness of its bioelectric field was more detailed, not a sophisticated consciousness, genuinely not, but something present, something that didn't want to be in pain. He held the charge steady, not increasing it, and looked at the troll for a moment. "Out," he said. The troll blinked. Harry increased the charge slightly, not much, just enough to make the point clearly. The troll turned around with the slow, effortful dignity of something very large trying not to appear bothered, and walked back the way it had come. Ron watched it go with his mouth open. Harry opened the bathroom door. Hermione was where he'd known she'd be, against the far wall, knees pulled up, genuinely frightened in the clean, uncomplicated way of someone confronting something they had no framework for. She looked at Harry and Ron in the doorway, and her face did several things quickly. "Are you all right?" Harry said. "Yes." Her voice was steady, which meant she was pulling herself together actively, which was itself a kind of courage. "Is it? Where did it? Gone," Harry said. "Ron hit it with a torch." Ron looked at him. "I threw a torch at it and it didn't do anything. It caused a distraction," Harry said. "That was useful." Ron absorbed this. "I did cause a distraction," he agreed. Hermione stood up. Her robes had dust on them and her hair was more chaotic than usual, and she looked at them both with the expression of someone who has just had a genuinely terrible experience and is deciding whether or not to cry about it, and choosing not to. "You came back for me," she said. "Obviously," Ron said, with the exact same inflection Harry had used 10 minutes ago. Something happened in Hermione's face, small and quick and genuine. She looked at Ron for a moment, and then at Harry, and then at the floor, and then said briskly, "We should go before the professors find us." "They're going to find us anyway," Harry said. "We should tell them about the troll," and he paused. "Make the story relatively simple." "You mean leave out the part where you walked up to a mountain troll and told it to leave," Hermione said. "I mean leave out the details that are hard to explain quickly." They were found by McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell 3 minutes later in the corridor outside the bathroom. McGonagall looked at them with an expression that was managing multiple things at once, relief and fury, and the precise version of each appropriate to different students. Snape said nothing but watched Harry with an attention that was sharper than usual. Quirrell looked at Harry and Harry looked back, and the thing underneath Quirrell's field pressed up and looked out. Harry kept his face neutral. McGonagall took 50 points from Gryffindor for being in the wrong place during an evacuation, and then gave them back plus 30 more when Hermione told a version of the story that was technically accurate and strategically incomplete. She said they'd come back for her, and that Harry had scared the troll off, which was true, and McGonagall looked between the three of them and seemed to make a decision about what to believe and what not to press. "You were very lucky," she said. "We were prepared," Harry said. McGonagall looked at him. 10 points to Gryffindor," she said, to Snape's visible displeasure, for whatever precisely that means. Walking back to Gryffindor Tower, the three of them slightly ahead of the professors, Ron said quietly, "You told a mountain troll to get out." "I did," Harry said, "and it went." "It did." Ron walked in silence for 3 steps. "Then you are the most mental person I have ever met, and I have twin brothers." "Thank you," Harry said. "That wasn't never mind." "Yes, you're welcome." Ron glanced at him sidelong. "What did you do to it exactly?" "It just stopped." "I gave it a reason to reconsider its priorities," Harry said. Hermione made a sound that was probably a laugh repackaged as a cough. She looked at Harry with the complicated expression she'd been developing specifically for him, part exasperation, part genuine admiration, part intellectual fascination with something she was still working out the full shape of. "We need to talk more about what you can do," she said. "Properly, with notes." "Tomorrow," Harry said. "Tonight," she said. "I'll make tea. There's a first-year common room privilege loophole if you know where." "Hermione," Ron said. "We just survived a mountain troll." "I'm aware of that, which is why I want to understand what resources we actually have before the next one." She said it with complete seriousness, and then glanced at both of them and something warmed in her face, real and unguarded, the way feelings were when they'd stopped having a reason to hide. "Also, I want tea. It's been a very alarming evening." They found a corner of the common room after everyone else had gone to bed, and Hermione made tea with the small charm she'd been practicing, and they sat in the firelight and talked for 2 hours. Not just about Harry's abilities, about all three of them, what they were good at, what they were still learning, how those things complemented each other. Ron's spatial intelligence and his instinctive understanding of magical systems and games, the way he thought in patterns and positions. Hermione's depth and her speed of recall, and the fact that she was better at formal spellwork than either of them, and knew it without being insufferable about it, mostly. Harry's storm sense and his power, and the 3 years of practice that had given him something more important than raw ability, the habit of paying attention. It wasn't a strategy meeting exactly. It was something more ordinary and more important than that. It was 3 people who had been moving toward each other, becoming, definitively, 3 people who had arrived. When the fire burned low and they finally said goodnight, Harry sat for a moment alone in the empty common room. the firelight, the portraits sleeping in their frames, the distant sound of the castle settling. He thought about Quirrell in the corridor, the way the thing underneath had looked at him. The intelligence of it, the age of it, the patience of it. Not the troll. The troll had been a diversion, he was sure of that now. Quirrell had let the troll in to create chaos, to clear the castle, and he'd used the time to do something. Harry didn't know what yet. He pulled out the parchment from his inner pocket, the one with his questions. He crossed out what does he want with it, because he'd known the answer to that for weeks. He added a new one, when will he move, and underneath that, what happens if I wait too long? He didn't like that question, but he liked ignoring it less. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to Ron's easy breathing and Neville's occasional murmur and Dean and Seamus's absolute silence. The dormitory was warm and it smelled of stone and wood smoke and the various particular smells of 5 different people's belongings, and Harry had learned to navigate it in the dark without waking anyone. He stared at the ceiling. Above the castle, his sky was clouded, real clouds, weather system clouds, nothing to do with him. He let them be. He needed to think, and his clearest thinking happened in stillness. The stone needed to be moved, or Voldemort needed to be stopped before he reached it. Those were the 2 variables. Either Dumbledore moved the stone, which required telling Dumbledore what he knew, which required deciding he trusted Dumbledore with the full picture, which he was still not entirely certain about, or Harry dealt with Quirrell directly, which was possible, and which he didn't prefer because dealing with a fragment of Voldemort's soul in the middle of a school with 500 students, and it was not an ideal environment for that kind of work. Or a third option, which was that Harry positioned himself to intercept Quirrell when Quirrell finally moved for the stone, and handled it then. He thought about the Peverell account in the vault. Ignatius Peverell had written, in the meticulous and somewhat self-satisfied way of a very old man documenting things he wanted the future to understand. The marked do not look for conflict, but they do not avoid it when it comes, because the storm did not choose them for their patience. It chose them for their willingness to stand in the path of a thing and say, no further. No further, Harry thought. He slept. November came in like a closing door, cold, gray, the light going thin and early. Quidditch practice in the dark mornings, breath misting, the nimbus feeling like an extension of his body now, precise and responsive. The first match against Slytherin was 2 weeks away, and Wood was running them through tactical drills with the committed intensity of someone for whom this was genuinely the most important thing happening. Harry flew the drills and enjoyed them and paid attention to Flint, the Slytherin captain, who came to watch practice twice, standing at the edge of the pitch with his arms crossed and his face doing its best impression of not being there for strategic intelligence, which was not a very good impression. Snape had started showing up to watch Quidditch practice. This was unusual. Snape had no official connection to the Gryffindor Quidditch team and would not have been caught dead showing enthusiasm for them. He stood on the pitch boundary in his black robes and watched Harry specifically, and his electrical field when he did had that same complex quality Harry had been cataloging since the first potions lesson. Not malicious, not exactly. Not protective, not exactly. Something Harry kept turning over and not quite resolving. He asked Hermione, because Hermione was a better research resource than the library on most interpersonal topics, having read more biographies and more social histories than anyone else Harry had encountered. Snape knew your father, Hermione said, without looking up from Intermediate Transfiguration. Hated him by most accounts, they were at school together. He hated my father. Deeply, from what I can find, your mother. She paused, looked up. I didn't research this to pry. There was context. What about my mother? She and Snape were friends, before Hogwarts actually. They grew up near each other. It ended badly during school, and I don't know the full story of that. She looked at him with the careful honesty she always deployed when she was saying something she knew mattered. I think his feelings about you are complicated because of her. Harry absorbed this. He thought about the quality of Snape's field, the thing underneath the contempt that he'd never quite named. He named it now grief. Old grief, the kind that has calcified rather than healed, that has become structural rather than acute. The kind that makes a person sharp-edged because the alternative is falling apart. He didn't say anything about this to Hermione. It was Snape's, not his. But it changed his picture of the man in ways he'd keep. The day before the Quidditch match, Harry went to the third-floor corridor. It was late afternoon, the light going golden and horizontal through the high windows, the corridor empty. He stood outside the locked door and listened with the deep sense, pushing further than he usually did, layering through the enchantments one at a time. Fluffy first, enormous, triple heart-beated, currently awake. Beyond it, a drop down through a trapdoor, then several distinct spaces he could read by their electromagnetic signatures. plant life, dense and reactive. Water contained something fiery. Something that held magical objects like a crystalline lattice. And at the deepest point, something small and absolutely extraordinary, a concentration of stored magical energy so dense and structured it made his back teeth ache from 40 feet above through several layers of stone. The stone was still there. He also felt, threading through the wards around the door like something testing the joins, a very faint residual trace of Quirrell's interference signal. Recent, hours old maybe, he'd been here. He'd been testing the door. He wasn't through yet, but he was looking for the way. Harry stood in the corridor for a long moment. Then he made a decision. He went to find Hermione and Ron. They met in the library in the corner they'd claimed by default, tucked behind the charms section where Madame Pince rarely came because the charms students were generally too intimidated by her to browse. Harry put his parchment on the table and looked at them both. "Quirrell's going to move soon," he said. "Days maybe, not weeks." Hermione and Ron looked at each other, then at him. "How do you know?" Hermione asked. "He was at the door today. He's testing the wards from outside. He's found most of the joins already. The enchantments aren't designed to be invisible to someone who knows what they're looking for. They're designed to be impassable. But he's patient and he's been in this school for months and he's had help he hasn't used yet from the thing that's directing him." "Voldemort," Ron said. He said it flat, without ceremony, the way someone says a word they've decided to stop being afraid of. It had taken him 2 weeks to get there and Harry had watched the process with respect. "Yes," Harry said. "Whatever is left of him, which is enough. He knows about the stone because he's been studying it for longer than we've been alive." He looked at the parchment. "We need to tell Dumbledore. I've been waiting too long for the right kind of certainty, and I'm not going to get it, because this isn't that kind of situation." Finally, Hermione said, and managed to say it in a way that was relieved rather than told you so. "Tomorrow, after the match," Harry said. "I want to talk to him directly, not send a note through McGonagall, and I want us all there." "Right," Ron said. "Good, yes." He paused. "After the match, priorities." "Correct," Harry said. Hermione looked between them. "You're both treating Quidditch as a priority when Voldemort is in the building." "One thing at a time," Harry said. "It's a game." "It's my game," Harry said, which was not quite what he meant but was the truthful version. The match mattered to him in a way that was separate from strategy or importance. The way some things matter just because they do, because they're yours and you're good at them and the sky is enormous when you're 100 feet up in it, and you've spent 3 years being careful about flying. One morning, then Dumbledore. Hermione looked at him for a moment, and then her face did the thing where she was deciding to pick her battles, and she said, "Fine, but I'm going to be revising tomorrow morning, and you're not allowed to have any significant revelations until I'm there." "I'll try to keep Voldemort's schedule clear," Harry said. Ron choked on nothing. Hermione pressed her lips together very hard. The match the next morning was brilliant. The sky was wide and cold, and the pitch was packed, Gryffindor and Slytherin, the first match of the season, the noise building from both sets of stands in the particular competitive way of old rivals. Harry mounted the nimbus and rose into it and felt the sky open around him. He was looking for the snitch, but he was also watching Flint, the way he'd decided he would, tracking the Slytherin captain's attention as much as the game itself, using him as a compass. It worked. Flint's eyes moved towards something small and golden near the Gryffindor goalposts at 13 minutes in, and Harry was already moving before the glint resolved into a target. Then his broom tried to throw him off. It was not a malfunction. Brooms didn't malfunction like that, not with the particular quality of this, the bucking and jerking that felt like interference rather than mechanical failure, like someone was applying a spell to the broom's enchantments from outside. He locked his legs against the handle and stayed on through sheer physical stubbornness and felt with the deep sense for the source of it. Someone in the stands was doing this. He couldn't immediately find the weight. There, the interference pattern was complex and deliberate, the kind that required sustained concentration. He pushed his sense along the thread of it and found Snape. In the faculty box, lips moving, eyes fixed on Harry's broom, his field tight with focused magical intent. Harry thought counterjinx. He thought it from the shape of what Snape was doing, fighting something, not causing it. Then he thought, if Snape is fighting it, someone else started it. He looked across the stands, searching. Found the wrong signal almost immediately. Quirrell. In the crowd, turbaned, his field doing the thing it did when the thing underneath was fully engaged, the interference at maximum, the layered consciousness pressing forward. The jinx was Quirrell's. Snape was trying to break it. Harry looked at Quirrell across 500 feet of open air and held his gaze for 2 seconds. The jinx stopped. Not because of anything Harry had done with magic, just because of what it meant to Quirrell that Harry had found him. that the jinx hadn't worked, and Harry knew the source and was looking straight at him in front of the entire school. The consciousness underneath Quirrell recoiled quickly, re-establishing cover. The broom steadied. Harry pulled it into a dive, not toward the snitch, not yet, making himself recover visibly and deliberately, showing Wood and the team that he was all right. Then he climbed back to altitude and found the snitch properly, and caught it 4 minutes later in a flat sprint that ended with him nearly taking the goalposts off their mounts as he pulled up. The snitch closed in his fist, the Gryffindor stands erupting. Wood was screaming something triumphant. Ron was on his feet in the stands, both arms up. Even the Gryffindor ghosts were celebrating, which was slightly eerie because celebrating ghosts look like people in very high spirits about something that happened to them a long time ago. Harry landed and opened his fist and looked at the snitch sitting in his palm, wings folded, waiting. He looked across the emptying pitch toward where Quirrell had been. Gone now. Back to wherever Quirrell went when he wasn't teaching inadequate defense and testing locked doors. Tomorrow, Harry thought, Dumbledore. He was caught by the team before he could think any further, carried briefly and loudly from the pitch, which was embarrassing and also, he would admit it only to himself, genuinely, quietly wonderful. People who wanted to carry you somewhere because you'd done something worth celebrating. He filed this in the folder marked things that deserve proper attention and let himself have it for the length of time it took to walk from the pitch to the castle. Then he put it away and started thinking about what to say to Dumbledore. He was still thinking about it at dinner, which was the good kind of thinking, productive, working through scenarios, building towards something. Hermione kept glancing at him with the familiar expression of someone watching a process they recognize and choosing not to interrupt. Ron ate 3 helpings of everything and talked about the match with Fred and George, and periodically looked at Harry with the specific warmth of someone who was proud of their friend and wasn't sure whether to say it. Harry decided not to wait until tomorrow. He wasn't a wait-until-tomorrow person by nature. He'd become one by circumstance, because waiting had been a survival strategy at Privet Drive. But he wasn't there anymore, and Quirrell had shown his hand today, and the window between thinking about moving and moving was narrowing in ways Harry didn't like. He caught McGonagall before she left the staff table. "Professor," he said, "I need to speak with Headmaster Dumbledore. Tonight if possible." She looked at him with that sharp, assessing look she had, the one that weighed what you were saying against what you weren't saying and usually came up with a fairly accurate number. "This is important," she said, "not a question." "Yes," Harry said. She studied him for a moment more. "I'll send word. Wait in the corridor outside his office. He'll expect you." Harry went to get Hermione and Ron. They walked through the castle in the November dark, torches guttering in the corridor drafts, portraits watching with the mild interest of people who have seen most things and find them moderately diverting, and none of them spoke much, because there wasn't much to say that they hadn't already said. They knew what they knew. Now they were going to give it to someone with the authority to act on it. Harry just needed to be sure Dumbledore would act on it correctly. Outside the stone gargoyle guarding the headmaster's staircase, Harry stopped and looked at it for a moment. He thought about what the hat had said about patience. He thought about the Peveril account. The storm chose them for their willingness to stand in the path of a thing and say, no further. He thought about Quirrell looking at him from the crowd today, the thing underneath him flinching back. He thought about a field in August with pylons overhead and a sky that had built itself in a minute, and a boy who had stood in it with his hands open instead of running. "I'm ready," he thought, not to the storm. It didn't need to be told. It was already there. It was always there, but to himself. "I'm ready for this." The gargoyle moved. Dumbledore was waiting. Chapter 5, What Gods Owe. Dumbledore's office was exactly what it should have been and nothing like Harry had expected. He'd expected, he wasn't sure. Grandeur, maybe. The deliberate architecture of power. What he found instead was a room that looked like the inside of a very interesting mind. Circular, yes, and full of silver instruments that spun and clicked and exhaled small puffs of smoke in colors that had no names, and portraits of previous headmasters dozing in their frames, and books stacked in ways that suggested they were organized by some principle that was not the alphabet. A large bird sat on a perch near the window, flame red and gold, watching the 3 of them come in with eyes that were far too intelligent for a bird. Dumbledore himself sat behind the desk. He was wearing deep purple robes and half-moon spectacles, and he looked, more than anything else, like someone who had been expecting this visit and had been wondering what form it would take. "Harry," he said. "Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley. Sit down, please." They sat. Harry looked at Dumbledore and Dumbledore looked at Harry, and the quality of that exchange was specific. Not a test, not quite. More like 2 people who have been aware of each other from a distance, finally being in the same room and finding out what that actually felt like. What Harry felt from Dumbledore's field was extraordinary. The most complex magical signature he'd encountered, layered decades deep, power that had time to become something more than power, become precision and weight, and the particular quality of a mind that had been working on very hard problems for a very long time. And underneath all of that, complicated and old and not entirely comfortable, guilt, not the sharp kind, the low structural kind, the kind built into the foundation. He filed this, he didn't use it. It was Dumbledore's, not his. I know about the Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. He said it directly, without preamble, because there was no useful version of this conversation that started with anything else. He watched Dumbledore's face and Dumbledore's field simultaneously, and what he saw was, not surprise, something more interesting. The specific quality of someone who has prepared for several possible versions of a conversation and is now identifying which one has arrived. "Do you?" Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and measured and completely unreadable in the conventional sense, though his field told a more complicated story. "I know it's under the third-floor corridor. I know what's guarding it." Harry leaned forward slightly. "And I know that Professor Quirrell has been testing the wards for at least the last 3 weeks with increasing frequency, and I know what's directing him." Silence. Hermione was very still beside him. Ron had his hands flat on his knees. "What do you believe is directing him?" Dumbledore said. "Voldemort," Harry said. "A fragment of him, something that survived because he'd taken steps, magical steps, to prevent complete death. It's parasitic, it's using Quirrell's body, and it's been planning this since before term started." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The silver instruments spun. The phoenix, Harry had identified it by now. A real phoenix, the bioelectric field like a coal, watched without blinking. "How?" Dumbledore said. "Do you know this, Harry?" "Because I can feel him when he's in the same room," Harry said. "His field is wrong. The interference pattern of 2 separate consciousnesses sharing one nervous system is distinctive when you know what to look for." Dumbledore looked at him over his spectacles with an expression that Harry would later identify as the one he kept for things that were significantly outside his existing framework. "You can feel bioelectric fields," Hermione said, because she'd been waiting to be useful and this was her moment. "He is storm-marked. He has been since he was 8. The electrical sensitivity is, Professor, it's quite extensive." Dumbledore looked at Hermione, then back at Harry. "Storm-marked," he said quietly, not testing the term, recognizing it. He knew what it meant, of course he did. "Since I was 8, Harry confirmed. Another silence. Dumbledore removed his spectacles and set them on the desk and looked at Harry without them, and the look was different without them, more direct, less curated. "I owe you an apology," he said, and the straightforwardness of it was not what Harry had prepared for. "For what specifically?" Harry said. "For not knowing this. For not, I should have checked. I should have visited. There are things I told myself about the necessity of your particular circumstances that I am no longer as comfortable with as I was." He was quiet. "You grew up alone with this." "I managed," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Rather better than you should have had to." He put his spectacles back on and whatever had opened in him closed again to something more composed. "The stone. You're telling me this now because you believe Quirrell is close to moving." "Days," Harry said. "Possibly less. He tried to jinx my broom during the Quidditch match today. He's getting less careful, which means he's getting more urgent. Whatever timeline he's operating on is compressing." Dumbledore nodded slowly. He looked at the middle distance for a moment, clearly thinking through something with the speed of someone who had already done preliminary calculations and was now adjusting them. "Then, I can move the stone. Removing it from the castle entirely was always the backup option." "Why hasn't it been the primary option?" Hermione asked, with the polite precision of someone asking a question they know might be uncomfortable. Dumbledore looked at her. "Because I believed Hogwarts more secure than any alternative," he said. "And because, if I am honest, Miss Granger, there was a part of me that hoped that the presence of the stone here with its protections might draw out someone I have been looking for a decade and allow me to deal with the matter finally." A pause. "I had accounted for most contingencies." "You didn't account for me," Harry said, not accusatory, just true. "No," Dumbledore said, "I did not." Harry sat with that for a moment. "Then, move the stone tonight if you can. Or at least reinforce the corridor ward. There's a join in the southwestern enchantment that he's been working on. I can show you exactly where." "I know the join," Dumbledore said, and something in his voice told Harry he'd known it was there and had left it as a kind of funnel, which was the chessmaster habit Dumbledore apparently hadn't entirely shaken, using the gap to control where Quirrell would try to enter rather than eliminating the entry point. Strategy that made sense from a certain angle and less sense from the angle where you had 3 11-year-olds in the building. "Close it anyway," Harry said, "and move the stone." And then we can deal with Quirrell and what's directing him separately, properly, with adults involved and the students not in the middle of it. Dumbledore studied him. You have given this considerable thought. I've had 2 weeks, Harry said. I didn't want to come to you before I understood the full shape of it. Why? Because I wanted to give you information that was useful, not a problem I didn't understand. Harry paused. And because I wanted to come to you, not be sent for. There's a difference. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. The phoenix made a low sound, melodic and brief, like a question. You are not what I expected, Dumbledore said finally. What did you expect? Dumbledore smiled, and it was a different kind of smile from the ones he'd used in the Great Hall, smaller, realer. A boy who needed to be guided. Redirected, protected from the size of the things coming toward him. He folded his hands on the desk. I prepared for the wrong thing. That is entirely my responsibility. I don't need protecting, Harry said, but I'm open to collaboration. They're not the same thing. No, Dumbledore said, they are not. He looked at Harry for another moment, and then at Ron and Hermione, and something settled in his expression, an adjustment, a recalibration, the quality of a person updating a significant belief. Very well, I'll go to the corridor tonight. The stone will be moved by morning. Good, Harry said. He stood. Ron and Hermione stood with him. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry stopped. The fragment of Voldemort and Quirrell. You said you can feel it. He chose his words carefully. How clearly? Clearly enough, Harry said. I know when he's in a room before I see him. I know when the thing underneath is paying attention versus dormant. He paused. I know it noticed me noticing during the match. It knows I know what it is. Dumbledore absorbed this with the stillness of someone receiving important information and managing their reaction to it. Then it may not wait for the stone to make its next move, he said quietly. Harry had thought of this. He'd thought of it, sitting in the common room the night after Halloween, watching the fire and listening to the castle. I know, he said, I'll be ready. He left before Dumbledore could say anything else about being careful. They walked back through the castle in the same quiet as before, the torches throwing long shadows across the stone floors. Ron let out a breath like something that had been building since they sat down. Hermione walked with her arms folded and her expression doing the complex work of processing and filing simultaneously. He's going to move the stone, Ron said. He said he would, Harry agreed. You think he will? Yes, he's not the kind of person who says things he doesn't mean. Harry paused. He's the kind of person who means things he shouldn't and doesn't always notice the gap, but his word is his word. The bit about expecting a boy who needed guiding, Hermione said carefully. I know, that would have been if you'd been different, if you'd come here without what you have. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I'm not interested in what I would have been, Harry said. I'm what I am. Ron looked at him sideways. I know you're always calm and all that, but that man terrifies most of the school, and you basically told him to close the gap in his own words. He listened, Harry said. He did, Ron agreed, with the weight of someone filing this away as important information about Harry. He really did. They split at the dormitory stairs. Harry went up to the boys' dormitory and lay on his back in the dark and listened to the castle, extending his sense outward through the stone. He found Dumbledore's field moving through the corridors below, that extraordinary, layered signal, currently purposeful and moving toward the 3rd floor. Good, he was going. He found Quirrell in the defense classroom on the 1st floor, field tight and active, the thing underneath pressing forward with the particular urgency of a plan accelerating. He found the stone deep below, still pulsing with its dense concentrated energy. For a while everything stayed where it was and Harry almost slept. Then Quirrell moved. Harry was sitting up before he'd consciously processed the information. Quirrell's field moving fast, not toward the classroom door in the corridor, but down. Through the castle's interior passages, the maintenance routes that threaded between the major spaces and that Quirrell had apparently been mapping for weeks. Moving toward the 3rd floor from below, Harry was out of bed with his shoes on in 30 seconds. He stopped at the dormitory door. He considered this for exactly 3 seconds, 3 seconds being enough time to run the relevant calculations. Dumbledore was at the corridor. He'd reach it before Quirrell did from above through the main route. Harry was below. He could cut Quirrell off in the maintenance passage and that would be better, cleaner. No need to go through the stone's chambers at all. He went down. The maintenance passages of Hogwarts were narrow and dark and smelled of old stone and something faintly mineral, and they were more extensively mapped in Harry's internal model of the castle's electromagnetic structure than Quirrell probably knew Harry had. He moved through them fast, the deep sense extended fully ahead of him, tracking Quirrell's signal and keeping distance. He needed to be ahead of him, not behind. Ahead between Quirrell and the 3rd floor entry point, and then they would have a conversation. He came up through a service hatch into a corridor on the second floor, moved quickly to the staircase, took it 3 steps at a time, and arrived in the third-floor corridor 30 seconds before Quirrell's signal reached the junction below. He stood in the corridor and waited. The stone was below him, still there, still intact. Dumbledore's field was. Harry pushed his sense out and felt the distance, felt the shape of it. Moving not toward the third floor, moving toward the grounds, toward the gate, away from the castle. He'd been called away. Harry stood with this information for a moment. Something had called Dumbledore away from the school. An owl, a message, something urgent enough that Dumbledore had left before he could seal the corridor. Quirrell's timing was exact, which meant the diversion was Quirrell's, or rather what directed Quirrell, patient and precise and operating on a longer timeline than Quirrell's own mind was capable of. He felt a flicker of something, not fear, closer to respect, the cold kind, for an opponent who was genuinely capable. Then the door at the end of the corridor opened. Quirrell stepped through. He was in his teaching robes, turbaned, and he moved without the stutter and the nervous shuffle of his classroom performance. Whoever Quirrell was underneath the thing using him, he was capable of competent movement when the performance wasn't necessary. He stopped when he saw Harry. The corridor was lit by a single torch. The distance between them was 20 feet. "Mr. Potter," Quirrell said. His voice was different, the stutter was gone, and the voice underneath was steadier, older feeling, not entirely Quirrell's. "Professor," Harry said. They looked at each other. Quirrell's field was at maximum interference now, the two consciousnesses not layered but pressed hard together, the thing underneath as close to the surface as it could come without complete control, and it was looking at Harry with the full attention of something that had been looking at him in some form for years. "You should not be here," Quirrell said. "Neither should you," Harry said. "The stone's been moved. Dumbledore cleared it out before you had the chance." This was a lie. The stone was still there. Harry could feel it below. But he said it without flinching, without a change in his bioelectric field, because he'd learned from the old Powers book that the Marked didn't just control storms. They controlled the electromagnetic quality of their own presence, what they broadcast, what they withheld. He said it like the truth, which was harder than most people appreciated. Quirrell's field shifted, the thing underneath calculating, testing the statement. "You're lying," it said, and the voice had changed, Quirrell's mouth still moving but the cadence not Quirrell's, something older and more deliberate. "The stone is below, I can feel it, and so can you." "Yes," Harry said, "I can. Then you know why I'm here." "I know what you want it for," Harry said. "Resurrection, physical form, a body that isn't borrowed." He looked at Quirrell, looked at the shape of the interference, the quality of the consciousness underneath, close to the surface, straining forward, and underneath that something Harry hadn't expected. Pain, genuine structural pain, the kind that came from existing in a fractured state for a decade, from being less than whole and aware of the diminishment every second. "It must be exhausting," he said. "Existing like that," the interference surged. "Don't," the voice said, sharp and cold. "I'm not mocking you," Harry said. "I'm reading you, there's a difference." Silence. The torch flame moved in a draft from somewhere. "You are extraordinary," the voice said, and the shift in tone was interesting, something that had decided to stop dissembling and try a different approach. "You know that. You've known it since you were 8 years old in a field with lightning coming through you. You are something the wizarding world hasn't seen in centuries, and you are wasted here." A pause, precise, studied. "I could teach you things no one at this school knows." "I have knowledge that died with me." "You didn't die," Harry said. "That no living wizard possesses. You have power that deserves proper guidance, proper direction, together." "You're offering me a partnership," Harry said. "I'm offering you your full potential." Harry looked at him for a moment. "You killed my parents," he said. Yes, no hesitation, no apology. The thing in Quirrell didn't deal in apologies, it dealt in calculations, and apologizing to Harry Potter for killing his parents was not a calculation that served its interests. They were in the way of a necessary goal. Their choices made them obstacles. "I don't regret necessary things." "I know," Harry said. "That's why the answer is number. You haven't considered." "I've considered everything relevant," Harry said. "You're not offering me potential. You're offering me your agenda dressed up as my potential. Those aren't the same thing." He took a step forward. "And you're in a building full of children, and you've been here all year, and every day you've been here, you've been a danger to them. I'm done with that." The thing in Quirrell was quiet, and then, "You're 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "What's your point?" It wasn't a taunt. It was a genuine question. He wanted to know what the thing believed about the relationship between age and capacity, because understanding your opponent's assumptions was more useful than understanding their tactics. "You cannot stop me," it said. "You have power, yes, but you are undertrained in the ways that matter, and I have been working magic since before your grandparents were born." Harry raised his hand. He didn't do anything with it. He just raised it, palm out, the way you'd show someone an empty hand. But the storm was in him like a tide coming in, not suppressed, not held back, just present, utterly available, the full depth of 3 years of practice and a nature that had been chosen by something ancient and extremely serious about its choices. The air in the corridor changed. It was subtle. The temperature didn't drop. The torch flame didn't gutter. But the electromagnetic quality of the space shifted in a way that anyone with any sensitivity would have felt, a pressure, a weight, the sense of something enormous being held very still. Quirrell's field spiked with something sharp and uncontrolled. "Quirrell," Harry said, and he was talking to Quirrell now, not the thing underneath. "You don't have to be here. You still have a self in there. I can feel it underneath everything. You didn't choose this. You can fight it." "He cannot," the voice said quickly, the thing reasserting control. "He has been mine too long." "Quirrell," Harry said again. Something flickered in Quirrell's field. Not the thing, Quirrell himself, the original inhabitant, pressing briefly forward with the effort of someone swimming up through deep water. His face changed for a fraction of a second, something desperate and exhausted in it, and then it was gone. But it had been there. Harry held that knowledge and made a decision. He moved forward fast, not running, not charging, just closing the distance with the purposeful speed of something that had made up its mind. Quirrell raised both hands, and the air in front of him crackled with a curse that lit the corridor dark red, and Harry rolled under it, the stone floor cold against his shoulder, and came up close. He put his hand on Quirrell's arm. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Later, he would understand the theory of it, that what the storm had given him, among other things, was a presence in the electromagnetic spectrum that was antithetical to the particular type of fragmented parasitic soul magic that Voldemort's survival relied on, not designed as a weapon, simply incompatible, the way certain frequencies cancel each other when they overlap, but the understanding came later. What he experienced in the moment was Quirrell's arm going white where Harry's hand touched it, a spreading reaction that moved through Quirrell's body like a wave, and the thing underneath going absolutely wild, panicking, which Harry had not seen it do before, and the panic was informative because it meant genuine threat, genuine incompatibility, the thing understanding something about Harry that Harry was only beginning to understand about himself. Quirrell threw himself backward. The contact broke. He slammed into the wall behind him and slid down it, and where Harry had touched his arm, the sleeve was burned through, and beneath it, the skin was wrong. Moving. Like something trying to come through from underneath. Harry stood and watched this with focused calm. Quirrell was making sounds that were partly pain and partly the thing inside him trying to reassert direction and not managing it well. The incompatibility Harry had introduced was reverberating through their shared nervous system, disrupting the connection. "Let him go," Harry said, to the thing, not to Quirrell. "I cannot," it said through Quirrell's mouth, and for the first time the voice was less certain than it had been, less composed. "If I release the host in this state, I will have." It stopped. It was calculating, Harry could feel it, the cold, desperate mathematics of a consciousness that had been surviving in fragments for a decade and was now facing a genuine existential threat. "You'll be less than you are," Harry said, "but you'll still be something. Quirrell will be himself, and you'll go find another way because you're not done, and I don't have the knowledge to finish what I'd need to finish tonight." He said this honestly because there was no advantage in pretending he was capable of something he wasn't. "Go, and we deal with the rest of this properly, with people who have the full knowledge and authority to do it correctly. And if I don't, then I finish learning what happens when I hold on longer," Harry said. "I don't particularly want to, but I will." The thing in Quirrell thought. Then it let go. The release was dramatic in an electromagnetic sense. The interference field collapsed, the two separate signals disentangling, and what happened to the freed fragment was something Harry felt rather than saw, a rapid dissolution, the cold electromagnetic signature of a structured consciousness coming apart into its component pieces and dispersing, like static clearing from a signal, not destroyed, not completely, but diminished, driven back to whatever form it took when it had nowhere to attach. Quirrell collapsed. Harry knelt beside him. Quirrell was unconscious, genuinely unconscious, not performed, and his arm where Harry had touched it was blistered and raw, and his face had the particular quality of someone who has been deeply and continuously controlled for months, and has just had that control removed all at once, like a person emerging from cold water. The stuttering nervousness was gone. Without the thing underneath managing his presentation, Quirrell looked younger than Harry had thought. Not very old at all, exhausted in the bone-deep way of someone who had been fighting something privately for a very long time. Harry sat back on his heels and looked at him. He heard footsteps on the stairs, multiple people, fast, and he extended his sense and found Dumbledore's signal returning, moving at speed through the castle. McGonagall behind him, Snape behind her. Someone had alerted them, or Dumbledore had never fully left, had simply appeared to leave and come back in the way of someone testing a hypothesis. He stayed where he was and waited. Dumbledore came through the door at the end of the corridor and stopped. He looked at Quirrell on the floor. He looked at Harry kneeling beside him. He stood in the corridor for a moment with the specific stillness of someone processing a scene that is significantly different from what they had anticipated. McGonagall came through the door behind him and made a sharp sound. Snape looked at Quirrell and then at Harry with an expression that Harry could not immediately read, and that his bioelectric sense gave him something complicated about, not the cold contempt that was Snape's professional default. Something else. Shock, partly. And underneath that, the old structural grief Harry had identified before, freshly agitated. "He's alive," Harry said. "He needs medical attention. His arm is burned and what was in him is gone, but the separation will have been traumatic." Dumbledore moved to Quirrell and knelt, his hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had dealt with magical injuries many times, assessment spells cast without apparent effort. His face did several things quickly and privately. "The stone," he said without looking up. "Still there," Harry said. "He didn't reach it. I stopped him in the corridor. And Voldemort, gone, dispersed. Not destroyed, I don't have the knowledge for that, but significantly diminished and without a host." He paused. "He'll need to find another way. We have time to prepare for it properly. Not infinite time, but real time." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, his hands still on Quirrell. Then he looked up at Harry, and the look was, Harry had to work to maintain the observation, because the quality of what Dumbledore was feeling in that moment was extremely complex, and some of it was directed at Harry in a way that took him a moment to identify. Pride. Complicated, guilty pride. The kind that knew it had nothing to do with the achievement but felt it anyway. "You went to him alone," Dumbledore said. "I went to intercept him before he reached the stone," Harry said. "Which I did. You are 11 years old. People keep saying that," Harry said, "as though it changes the information I've given you." Snape made a sound that might, in a different person, have been a laugh. McGonagall was looking at Harry with her arms folded and an expression that had abandoned most of its usual components, and was doing something much simpler, just looking, the way you look at something that has surprised you completely and that you're not yet sure what to do about. "You should not have come alone," Dumbledore said, "and I am very glad you did. Both of those things are equally true." "I know," Harry said. He stood up. His knees were fine. His hand where he'd touched Quirrell tingled faintly but not unpleasantly. "The stone should be moved permanently. Flamel should be told. He has the right to decide its fate." "He will be," Dumbledore said. "And Quirrell should be treated as a victim," Harry said. "Whatever he did it under sustained coercion and magical control. That has a bearing on responsibility." Dumbledore looked at him again with that same complicated expression. "I agree," he said quietly. "Good," Harry said. "I'm going to go tell Ron and Hermione what happened, since they're almost certainly awake and waiting. Then I'm going to sleep." He walked to the staircase. At the top he stopped. "Professor Dumbledore," he said. Dumbledore looked up. "The join in the southwestern ward, I'd still like that closed." "It will be closed before morning," Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. He went down the stairs. The castle was quiet around him, the deep stone quiet of very late at night when even the portraits were sleeping. His sense extended outward through the walls, the students in their dormitories, the slow pulse of the ghosts, the vast warm presence of Fluffy 3 floors up, the lake outside with its deep inhabitant moving in unhurried circles in the cold water. No wrong signal, no interference. The corridor where Quirrell's field had been layered and wrong was clean now, just stone and old wards and the distant pulse of the stone below, which would be gone by morning. He felt the sky above and let the storm breathe out slowly, the way you let out a long breath after something difficult. Somewhere over the lake, silent lightning walked the undersides of the November clouds. Not violent, not dramatic, just the storm doing what the storm did, patient and present in his. Ron and Hermione were both in the common room when he got there, sitting in the chairs by the dying fire with their robes still on, and their expressions arranged in the specific configuration of people who had been awake for hours, and had been very carefully not catastrophizing. They looked at him when he came through the portrait hole, and they read his face before he said anything, and some of the tension went out of them. "All right," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. He sat down. "I'll tell you everything." He did. He told them everything, with the same directness he'd used in Dumbledore's office, because they'd earned the complete version and he didn't believe in parceling out information to people who had earned your trust. He told them about the corridor and Quirrell and the contact and what had happened when he touched him and the dispersal and Dumbledore arriving after. Hermione listened with her arms wrapped around herself and her face doing careful, controlled things. When he finished, she said, "The touch. The blistering, that's what the Peverell account describes, isn't it? The marked are incompatible with fragmentary dark soul magic." "I think so," Harry said. "I need to read the account more carefully, but yes, I think that's what happened." "That's extraordinary," she said, "and then, you should have told us you were going. You were asleep. You should have woken us. You'd have insisted on coming," Harry said. "Yes," she said, with the firmness of someone making a point through admission. "We would have, because that's what we agreed on, all three of us." Harry looked at her. She was right. He knew she was right. He'd gone alone because going alone was his default. He'd been solving his own problems alone for a decade, and the habit ran deep, deeper than he'd understood. "You're right," he said. "I should have woken you. I'm sorry." Ron looked between them. "For the record, I would definitely have come," he said, "and probably been significantly less useful than Harry, but I would have been there, which matters." "It does," Harry agreed. "Just next time," Hermione said. "Next time is all I'm saying." "Next time," Harry said. "Yes." They sat by the fire for a while longer, the three of them not talking much. The fire burned down to embers, and the common room was warm, and the portraits slept, and the castle breathed. Harry sat with his hands on his knees and felt the whole building around him, every sleeping student, every corridor, the sky above, the deep water below. He felt the stone still below the third floor, still pulsing with its concentrated energy, still intact. And he felt the space where Quirrell's wrong signal had been, and the clean absence where Voldemort's fragment had dissolved. Not gone. He was honest with himself about that. Not finished. The thing that had killed his parents was not destroyed tonight, and there would be another time, and it would come for the stone or for something else, or directly for Harry, and that confrontation would require more than he'd had tonight. But tonight, the school was safe. The students were sleeping. The stone was whole. He thought about 8 years old in a field with pylons overhead and lightning coming down. He thought about holding his hands out and feeling the electricity pour into him and staying still. He thought about the old Powers book with its water-stained pages and its marginal arguments, and the word sovereign, and what it actually meant when you stripped away the grandeur of it, not above everything, not exempt from anything, just answerable to the thing that had claimed you and to nothing that hadn't. The storm was quiet in him, present as always, patient. He was ready for what came next. He just needed sleep first. "Bed," he said, standing. "Bed," Ron agreed with feeling. Hermione stood and looked at Harry and said quietly, with the precision she brought to things she meant completely, "You did well." Harry looked at her. Coming from Hermione Granger, 3 words with the full weight of her standards behind them, this was the equivalent of a substantial speech. "We did well," he said. "That's better." She smiled, the real one, the quick one, the one she didn't always let happen. "Yes," she said, "we did." They went to bed. Above the castle, the November sky was clearing, cloud by cloud, the stars emerging one by one, cold and enormous and entirely indifferent to the particular concerns of human beings and their inherited wars, which Harry found comforting in the specific way that very large things can be comforting when the very small things have been pressing close. He slept before his head finished settling on the pillow, and the storm rested with him, and outside the sky went clear and vast and dark, and the stars did what stars do, which is shine without being asked. Chapter 6, The Price of Thunder. The hospital wing smelled of dittany and clean linen, and the particular antiseptic quality of magical healing, which was sharper than its muggle equivalent, more like ozone than chemicals. Harry had never been in it before. He sat in the chair beside the bed where Madame Pomfrey had deposited him, not because he was injured. She'd checked him twice with the expression of someone who expected to find something wrong and was professionally dissatisfied by the absence of it, and looked at the high windows and waited. Outside, the November morning was doing exactly what he'd left it to do. Clear, still, the kind of cold that was clean rather than punishing. Dumbledore came in at 8. He sat in the other chair, the one on the opposite side of the bed, which was empty, Quirrell having been moved to a more private room where a team of healers from St. Mungo's were doing things Harry wasn't privy to, and he set a tin of something on the bedside table between them. "Lemon drops," Harry saw. "No thank you," Harry said. "I didn't offer," Dumbledore said mildly, and took one himself. He settled back in the chair with the ease of a man who had spent considerable time in hospital wing chairs and knew how to make them work. "How do you feel?" "Fine," Harry said, which was true. His hand had stopped tingling. He'd slept 4 hours. He felt clear. The particular clarity of having done something difficult and found the other side of it intact. The stone, Dumbledore said, was removed at 4 this morning. It is in transit to Nicola's Flamel. He has been informed of the circumstances and has made a decision regarding its future. He paused. He has chosen to destroy it. Harry absorbed this. His choice to make, he said. Yes. Dumbledore looked at his lemon drop with the thoughtful air of a man using a small object as a focal point for a large thought. He is 665 years old and has decided that this particular chapter has run long enough. Something in his voice was careful, shaped around something tender. He seemed not unhappy about it. Harry thought about 600 years. He thought about the weight of that, the particular shape of a life that had extended far past the normal boundaries, and whether at the end of it the stone felt like a gift or like homework you'd never quite finished. Quirrell, he said. Stable. He will recover physically. The magical damage is more complex. Sustained possession at the level he experienced leaves traces. The healers from St. Mungo's are experienced with it. Dumbledore looked up. You were right that his responsibility is complicated. I've spoken with the relevant ministry officials and made my position clear. Good, Harry said. They were not immediately receptive, Dumbledore said, with the dry tone of someone who had extensive experience with ministry officials not being immediately receptive to things. But they will be in time. I can be persistent when something is worth persistence. Harry believed this completely. Voldemort, Dumbledore said, and he said it the way Harry did, flat, undecorated, a word for a thing rather than a name to be afraid of. What you managed last night was remarkable and more important than you yet know. The fragment that was using Quirrell is gone, not destroyed as you correctly assessed, scattered, diminished, looking for another vessel. But the process of dispersal strips it of accumulated intent. It will take time to reconsolidate, real time. He paused. Years, possibly, long enough to prepare. For what? Harry said. The proper confrontation. For the proper confrontation, Dumbledore agreed. He looked at Harry steadily. There are things I should tell you. About the night your parents died, about certain magical measures Voldemort took to preserve himself, about the nature of what remains of him. I have been managing information about you and around you for 11 years, and I am not confident I have done it well. You haven't fully, Harry said, not unkindly, just true. Dumbledore accepted this without deflection, which Harry respected. I would like to begin doing it better, with your consent rather than on your behalf. Harry looked at him. The morning light through the hospital wing windows was coming in at a low angle, catching the silver of Dumbledore's hair and the glint of his half-moon spectacles, and his bioelectric field was doing the complicated layered thing it always did, but the guilt component was at the surface now in a way it hadn't been the night before. Less managed, more present. All right, Harry said. Tell me, Dumbledore told him. He told him about Voldemort's methods of ensuring survival, the soul magic, the Horcruxes, the word Harry hadn't known before and immediately understood the significance of. He told him how many there might be, his best estimate based on what he knew and suspected, which was more than Harry had and still less than either of them needed. He told him about the night at Godric's Hollow, not the version Harry had been given before, the simplified version, but the fuller one, Lily Potter's sacrifice. The protection it had created, what it meant that Voldemort's killing curse had bounced back, what it meant that Harry had survived it. He told him what the scar meant. Harry sat with this information for a while. The hospital wing was quiet. Sunlight moved on the floor in the slow way it moved when time was passing at its actual rate rather than the compressed rate of crisis. There's something in me, Harry said, not a question, working it out. A fragment, Dumbledore said. Small, unintentional, created in the moment the curse rebounded, when Voldemort's soul was already so damaged by his own choices that the violence of that night shattered another piece loose. He was watching Harry carefully. Not managing him, just watching, the way you watch someone handle something fragile and discover they know how to hold it. I do not know what it means for the future. I have theories, none of which are comfortable. Tell me the theories, Harry said. Dumbledore told him the theories. Harry listened to all of them without interrupting, which took some effort on the second theory because it had implications he wanted to argue with. But he waited. He let Dumbledore finish. The fragment in the scar, Harry said when Dumbledore was done. Can you feel it, right now? Dumbledore cast a spell, gentle, diagnostic. He looked at the result for a long moment. It's quieter than it should be, he said slowly. Given what you've told me about your contact with Quirrell, I wonder if the incompatibility affected it also. Indirectly, Harry thought about this. He reached for the thing in his scar the way he'd reach for the signal of anything electromagnetic, looking for the frequency, the shape. It was there, but it was dim, like a radio station at the edge of range, there but barely resolving. It's still there, he said, but it's smaller than it was. I think the storm has been crowding it, gradually. 3 years of the storm living in me, and whatever Voldemort's fragment is, it's not compatible with that. Not sustainably. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I know what that means. It's smaller. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, quiet moment. You may, he said carefully, have been solving a problem I didn't know how to approach, without knowing you were solving it. That seems like the kind of thing, Harry said, that would have been useful to know earlier. Yes, Dumbledore said, it would have been. He folded his hands. I am going to try to be better at this, Harry, at telling you things you need. I ask for some patience with the process of adjusting a very old habit. I'll be patient, Harry said. I told the Sorting Hat the same thing. He paused. I also told it I wouldn't be small. I remember, Dumbledore said. There was something in his voice that suggested the hat had indeed shared the content of that conversation, or at least its flavor. I would not ask you to be. Harry nodded. He stood. He was done with the hospital wing. It had served its purpose as a quiet place to have a necessary conversation, and he had other things to do. At the door he stopped because something occurred to him. Professor, he said, you came back last night. You'd left or appeared to leave, and then you came back before I expected. You were testing whether Quirrell would move. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, you were using the stone as bait the whole year. I was using the corridor as bait, Dumbledore said. The stone, I was less cavalier about the stone than it might appear. The chambers below had 17 separate enchantments contributed by the most capable members of my staff. I believed it secure. But not so secure you'd miss the chance, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The morning light, the quiet, the particular quality of this specific moment. Two people looking at each other without performance between them. No, he said, finally. Not so secure I'd miss the chance. I have made many decisions across a long life in which I prioritize strategic outcome over immediate safety, and I am not always certain I was right to do so. You weren't right last night, Harry said. The chambers were full of your students' contributions. If Quirrell had reached the stone before I intercepted him, I know, Dumbledore said, and what Harry felt from him when he said it was not defensive, not qualified. Just the clean, heavy thing that knowing something uncomfortable felt like when you stopped managing it. I know. Harry left him with it, because that was the right thing to do. You didn't take a person's reckoning away from them. You let them have it. The corridor outside the hospital wing was empty, early morning quiet, and Harry walked it alone for a moment before he heard the footsteps that weren't trying to be quiet, Ron, who approached everything at the same volume. Ron and Hermione were both there, at the end of the corridor, with the expressions of people who had been waiting since considerably before it was reasonable to be awake. Ron had his hair going in several directions and was carrying what appeared to be half a piece of toast he'd grabbed on the way out of the Great Hall. Hermione had a book which she hadn't opened. Well, Ron said, Harry told them. Both versions, what he'd told Dumbledore in the hospital wing and what Dumbledore had told him. He trusted them with the Horcrux theory, with the scar fragment, with all of it, because these were the people who had waited in the common room at 1 a.m. to make sure he came back, and there was no version of his life going forward that didn't include them in the full picture. Hermione processed the Horcrux information with the specific expression of someone encountering a concept of profound dark magical significance for the first time and immediately beginning to catalog the research implications. Ron processed it by going quiet in the way he went quiet when something was genuinely large, the way he'd gone quiet when Harry had first told them about Voldemort and Quirrell, a real stillness not performed, the kind that meant he was taking something seriously. There are more of them, Hermione said. The other fragments. Dumbledore thinks so. He doesn't know how many. We'll find out, she said, with the certainty of someone who has decided something, not predicted it. Not today, Ron said. Can it not be today? I haven't finished my toast. Harry looked at him. Ron looked back, completely serious, toast in hand. It's not today, Harry said. Good, Ron said and finished his toast. They walked to the Great Hall together for breakfast, and the normalcy of it, the three of them walking through the castle in the morning, the smell of food coming up from below, the sound of other students beginning to fill the corridors, was something Harry let himself have without examining it too closely. Some things didn't need examination. Some things just needed to be lived in. The Great Hall was buzzing. Not with knowledge of what had happened. The official information hadn't been distributed yet, and the events of the previous night had taken place in corridors most students never visited. But there was the particular social vibration of a large population that knew something happened without knowing what, the kind of low collective alertness that spread through an institution when something significant has shifted the air. Harry sat down at the Gryffindor table and served himself eggs and watched the room. Snape was at the staff table, eating with the focused efficiency of a man who uses breakfast as a task to be completed. He looked up once, caught Harry looking, held the look for a moment, and then looked away. His field had the complicated quality Harry had been cataloging all term, the grief, the old anger, the other things underneath. But this morning there was something else in it, something Harry had felt briefly the night before in the corridor. The thing he'd needed a moment to identify, respect. The difficult kind, from a person who doesn't give it often and is somewhat annoyed to find themselves giving it. Harry ate his eggs. Fred and George appeared on either side of him, with the coordinated precision that suggested they'd been planning this ambush for some time. They sat down in perfect unison and looked at him with identical expressions of studied casualness that fooled absolutely no one. So, Fred said, "Nothing to report," George said. "We just thought," Fred said. "We'd check in," George finished. "I'm fine," Harry said. "Of course you are," Fred said. "That's not suspicious," George said. "At all," Fred agreed. "What do you two actually know?" Harry said. "We know," Fred said, leaning forward, "that Percy was up at 3 in the morning and came back looking like he'd seen something he wasn't going to talk about, which for Percy means it was interesting. And we know," George said, "that you weren't in your dormitory at 1 this morning because we checked, because Ron told us you'd gone somewhere and we wanted to make sure that you came back," Fred said, and the twins managed to make this sound casual and failed entirely, and underneath the failure was something genuine that Harry didn't try to diminish. "I came back," Harry said. They looked at him for a moment. Then Fred put a piece of toast on his plate that Harry hadn't asked for, and George refilled his orange juice with a small charm, and they both went back to their own breakfast as though the exchange hadn't happened, which was the Weasley way of saying something without saying it. Harry ate the toast. Neville arrived and sat across from Harry with his remembrall in his hand, which was clear, which meant he hadn't forgot anything, which Neville seemed to find mildly suspicious. He looked at Harry with the expression he'd been developing since the corridor incident with Draco, a specific kind of alert attention, like someone who has recalibrated their understanding of what's possible and keeps checking the new framework against incoming information. "Are you all right, Harry?" he said. "Yes, Neville." "Right." Neville put the remembrall down. "Good." He reached for the porridge. Then, "I heard something happened. I wasn't going to ask, but is everyone all right?" "Everyone who matters is fine," Harry said. "Quirrell's in hospital, but he'll recover." Neville absorbed this. I never liked Quirrell much," he said carefully, "but I wouldn't want." "I know," Harry said. "He wasn't making choices the way we understand choices. He deserves to be all right." Neville nodded. He seemed satisfied with this in the way of someone who worries about the people at the margins of events and is reassured to find someone else worrying about them too. Draco Malfoy appeared at Harry's shoulder. Not at the Gryffindor table. He stopped behind it, which was its own kind of statement, because Draco Malfoy didn't go to other houses' tables. He was alone, without Crabbe and Goyle, which was the more significant departure. He had the expression Harry had seen before at Madame Malkin's, the one that meant he was arriving at something he hadn't planned to arrive at. "Potter," he said. "Malfoy," Harry said. People around them were watching. Subtly, the way people watch things at meals, eyes still technically on their food, attention entirely elsewhere. "I heard something happen last night," Draco said. His voice was even. He was working at even. "With Quirrell." "Yes." "Is it true he's in hospital?" Harry said. "He'll be all right. What he was carrying is gone." Draco looked at him. The calculation behind his eyes was obvious and complex, and Harry let it run, because Draco was working towards something and interrupting the process would be counterproductive. "My father," Draco said carefully, "had associations with certain interests in what Quirrell was carrying." "I know," Harry said. Draco's jaw tightened. "I didn't." "I know that too," Harry said. The relief in Draco's field was brief and genuine and quickly managed, the way he managed most things that revealed him. He straightened his robes. He looked at Harry with the complicated expression of someone who has decided to say the thing. "I behaved badly at the start of term," he said stiffly. "The remembrall?" "Yes," Harry said. "I'm not apologizing," Draco said, which was a lie and they both knew it, but saying it gave him enough armor to get the rest out. "I'm acknowledging that it was below what you're capable of," Harry said. "Yes," Draco blinked. Then briefly something close to a real expression, somewhere between amused and offended and disarmed. "You're very strange," he said. "I've been told," Harry said. "Sit down if you want." Draco looked at the Gryffindor table. He looked at Ron, who was watching him with the neutral expression of someone who has decided to wait rather than judge, and is finding it genuinely difficult. He looked at Hermione, who was reading her book again but tracking everything over the top of it. "I'm at the wrong table," Draco said, not accepting, not declining, leaving the door at a different angle. "You know where I sit," Harry said. Draco went back to the Slytherin table. He went alone without the bodyguard shuffle, and when he sat down something in how he arranged himself was different from before, not smaller. Draco Malfoy didn't do smaller, but less performed, less of a statement. Ron watched him go. Was that Malfoy apologizing? Close enough, Harry said. I didn't know he could do that. Neither did he, Harry said. Hermione put her book down and looked at Harry with the considering expression. You handled that well. I just talked to him. You talked to him like he was worth talking to, she said. That's not nothing, particularly for Draco Malfoy. She picked her book back up. We'll see what he does with it. Yes, Harry said, we will. The formal announcement came at lunch from Dumbledore, standing at the staff table with the assembled school in front of him and the clear November light coming through the high windows. He didn't tell them everything, he told them enough. Professor Quirrell had been taken ill. The defense against the dark arts position would be covered by visiting instructors for the remainder of the year. There was no cause for alarm in the school. Students with concerns should speak with their head of house. In the specific language Dumbledore chose and didn't choose, Harry could read the full picture. The wizarding world would know in time what had happened, some version of it, filtered through whatever ministry oversight existed, and whatever Dumbledore decided to say publicly. Harry's name would be in it. It always was. He thought about this and found that he didn't mind. Not because he wanted recognition. He didn't, particularly, the way some people wanted it. He didn't need the school to know, but he also wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened, or shrink from the consequence of being visible. The hat had been right about that. He wasn't going to be small. After lunch, he went to see Hagrid. The hut at the edge of the grounds was warm and smelled of something baking that was probably not meant to have the density and structural integrity it was achieving, and Fang the Boarhound took up approximately half the available floor space and had no strong opinions about it. Hagrid himself was at the fireplace, and he turned when Harry knocked and came in, and his face did everything that Hagrid's face did when it was feeling something strongly, which was all of it, all at once, with no filtering. Harry, he said, and it had the particular weight of someone for whom this name meant a great deal, always had. Hagrid, Harry said. Hagrid looked at him for a moment and then made a sound that was trying to be something else and didn't quite manage it, and he sat down heavily on his enormous chair and said, I heard bits of it, from Professor McGonagall, not all of it. Quirrell's going to be all right, Harry said, sitting on the other chair, which was scaled for humans and felt small in the context of Hagrid's furniture. He'll recover. And the other thing, what was in him? Gone, Harry said. For now. Hagrid nodded, his hands wrapped around a mug the size of a small bucket. He was quiet for a moment, and what Harry felt from him was the simple, enormous version of what Dumbledore had felt, guilt and love, and a kind of grief that had been going since a night 11 years ago and hadn't fully stopped. I brought ye here, Hagrid said. On Dumbledore's orders, and I was glad to do it, but I brought ye here and I put ye with those muggles, and then I came back and got ye and brought ye to all of this. He looked at his mug. I always wondered if I did right by ye. You did, Harry said. You came back. Took 11 years, Hagrid said, with the self-recrimination of someone who had been having this conversation with himself for a long time. You came back, Harry said again. You made the birthday cake. You told me about my parents. He paused. You told me about my parents like they were people, like they were your people. That mattered. Hagrid looked at him with eyes that were doing what Hagrid's eyes did when they were full. Your dad, he said, would have been so. He stopped. His voice had gone somewhere he couldn't follow it. I know, Harry said. He didn't know exactly, but he said it because it was what Hagrid needed to hear, and because on some level, on the level of the storm that had moved through him and settled and made itself his, he believed it was probably true. They had tea. Or rather, Hagrid had tea and Harry had something Hagrid called tea, and that had a texture that suggested the word was being used in the broadest possible sense. He drank it anyway, because Hagrid had made it, and that was enough. He was there for an hour, and they talked about Hogwarts and the creatures in the Forbidden Forest and Quidditch, and whether the school brooms should really be retired, and none of it was the conversation they'd technically been having since Harry walked in, but all of it was. When Harry stood to leave, Hagrid grabbed his shoulder with one enormous hand and looked at him very seriously. You know you can come here, he said. Whenever, whatever it is. I know, Harry said. Ye're not alone anymore, Hagrid said. I know ye were for a long time, and I'm sorry for that, but ye're not. Harry stood in the doorway of the hut with the cold November air coming in from the grounds and the lake and the sky, and he felt all of it. The castle behind him, Hermione in the library, Ron on the Quidditch pitch doing something unofficial with a broom, Neville in the greenhouse with Professor Sprout, the portraits and the ghosts in the Forbidden Forest at the edge of his sense, and further than that his sky, enormous and present and his. "I know," he said. "Thank you, Hagrid." He walked back up to the castle in the afternoon light. Snape found him. He was in the corridor outside the potions classroom, empty at this hour, the stone flags cold in the shadow that fell here all afternoon regardless of weather. Harry heard the footsteps and recognized the field and stopped walking and waited. Snape looked at him from 10 feet away with the expression he used in class when he had decided to say something and hadn't yet decided exactly how. "Potter," he said. "Professor," Harry said. A pause. "The broom," Snape said. "During the Quidditch match, the jinx." "You were countering it," Harry said. "I know, thank you." Snape's expression did something complicated. "I don't want your gratitude. You have it anyway," Harry said. Another pause. Snape looked at him with the same look he'd been giving him all term, the one that Harry had finally named. Looking for someone. Looking for the mother and the son, the way you look for something lost in the nearest place that might be holding it. "Your mother," Snape said and stopped. Harry waited. "She was the most gifted witch of her generation," Snape said, with the careful precision of a person choosing each word individually and with complete intent. Her talent with charms and protective magic, what she did at Godric's Hollow, was not an accident of love. It was an informed, deliberate choice made by someone who understood exactly what she was doing. She was exceptional. He stopped again. Harry said nothing. He gave Snape the silence to put things in. "You are not your father," Snape said. "Whatever I have projected onto you this term, you are not what I expected." "A lot of people have said that to me recently," Harry said. "Yes, well," Snape said with the dry precision that was his version of humor. "Perhaps it warrants examination." "I've been examining it," Harry said. "I think the issue is that people expected the circumstances, not the person." Snape was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your mother would have found that observation insufferably precocious." "Would she have been wrong?" Harry said. Something crossed Snape's face. Gone before Harry could fully catch it, but real, something that was the grief in something else, something that in a different person's face might have been the beginning of reluctant warmth. "No," he said. "She would have been right, and she would have found it insufferably precocious simultaneously. She had that capacity." He turned to leave, then he stopped. "Your potion last Thursday," he said, without turning around. "The fever-reducing draft, it was precisely calibrated." I did not comment. "I noticed," Harry said. "I am noting it now," Snape said and left. Harry stood in the corridor for a moment after he'd gone, and felt what that exchange had been and what it hadn't been, and what it might become over time if both of them were patient with it. The grief in Snape's field was still there, would probably always be there, calcified into him, load-bearing by now. But it had shifted slightly around Harry, the way a river shifts around a new obstruction, finding the new route. He could work with that. The last week of term was full of the particular energy of an ending. Exams mostly completed, Christmas approaching, students beginning to shed the tension of the working weeks and replace it with the anticipatory noise of people about to go home. The corridors were louder. The common room was warmer. Hermione had made a revision schedule that she'd given to both Harry and Ron had used his copy to make a paper crane, and Hermione had confiscated the crane and revised the schedule to include the time he'd wasted making it, and Ron had accepted this with the ease of someone who had established that the relationship could bear this kind of friction. Harry watched both of them and felt the particular satisfaction of seeing people settle into themselves. He sat his exams. He did well, because he'd done the reading and understood the material, and the practical components were things he could do in his sleep. He didn't do anything unexpected in the exams, which required more restraint than the actual content, because the urge to solve certain problems in ways that weren't strictly within the scope of the question was ongoing and had to be managed. In Transfiguration theory, he wrote about the relationship between intention and transformation with a specificity that made McGonagall, returning his paper, say, "Dumbledore's paper on recursive transformation, Mr. Potter. Did you read it?" "3 times," Harry said, "and the follow-up 1974 paper on stable state maintenance. I couldn't find it in the library." McGonagall reached into her desk and produced a slim-bound pamphlet. "My personal copy. Return it before you leave for the holidays." He read it on the train home. The train back to London had the same rhythm as the train north had, reversed, the landscape going from the wide cold north to the increasingly domesticated south, fields becoming suburbs, becoming the edge of the city. Ron had a chocolate frog that he shared 3 ways. Hermione had a book she was reading, but kept setting down when the conversation got interesting. Harry had the window and the sky, which was doing what December skies did, gray and low and still, a weight of weather waiting to happen. "Christmas," Ron said, "at some point south of Birmingham." "Plans, the Dursleys," Harry said. For a few days, Ron pulled a face that was expressive enough not to require words. "It's fine," Harry said. "Come to ours," Ron said. "Mum already said. She said when we write she always cooks for 10 anyway. 2 more doesn't matter." "1 more," Hermione said. "2," Ron said firmly and looked at her with the kind of look that was not open to debate. "She said." Hermione looked at the window. "I have my parents," she said carefully, and there was something in it, the way she said my parents, the small note in it of someone managing something they hadn't fully processed yet. The first Muggle-born term at Hogwarts, carrying the whole year home to people who couldn't fully enter it with her. Harry felt this with the deep sense and left it alone and filed it under things she'd tell them about when she was ready. "Bring your parents," Ron said. "Mum loves Muggles. She'll ask them the same questions 40 times, but she'll mean every one of them." Hermione looked at him, then at Harry. Then she said, "I'll write and ask." "Good," Ron said, satisfied. They pulled into King's Cross as the sky outside was going dark, the platform lights making long reflections on the wet surface of the platform, and the families waiting on the other side of the barrier were visible through the steam, the Weasleys in a cluster of red hair, Mrs. Weasley with her arms already going out toward whoever arrived first. Mr. Weasley trying to look like he wasn't scanning the platform with the avid interest of a man who had opinions about every piece of Muggle infrastructure visible. Harry came through the barrier last, because he had no family waiting on the other side, and there was no hurry. He stood on the platform. The Dursleys were there, Vernon, arms crossed, looking at the platform with the specific expression of someone who wants to leave immediately. Petunia, thin and rigid, watching Harry come through with her own particular brand of complicated. Dudley was there, bigger than ever, looking at the train with the narrowed interest of someone considering whether he could take it. Harry walked toward them. He was carrying his trunk, the owl cage empty because Hedwig had flown north. She preferred that to the train, and he didn't blame her. He had his wand in his pocket, and the Peveril account in his bag, and the tin of lemon drops Dumbledore had pressed on him at the end of their last conversation, which he'd taken because it was the gesture that mattered. Vernon started before Harry reached him. "You, exactly on time. Well, we've been waiting 20 minutes in this. What in the blazes are you wearing?" "School robes," Harry said. "I'll change when we get to the car." "You'll change now, when we get to the car," Harry said pleasantly and kept walking, which meant Vernon had the choice of standing there or walking with him, and Vernon, after a moment of genuinely novel indecision, walked. Petunia fell into step. She looked at Harry in the sideways way she'd been doing since he was 8, the way of someone who knew something was different about him and had never had the vocabulary for it and had decided the solution was to not look directly. "You're taller," she said, which was the safest thing she could think of to say. "Yes," Harry said. "How was?" She stopped, started again. "Was it, did they?" She didn't have a way to finish this question that didn't require her to acknowledge what the question was about, which was whether Harry had been all right, which opened the question of what all right had meant for the previous 10 years, which was a door she had no interest in opening. "It was good," Harry said, and meant it absolutely. It was genuinely good. Petunia looked at him. For just a moment, brief, quickly gone, but real, something in her face was something other than pinched and controlled, something that might have been relief, the specific, complicated relief of a person whose conscience has been inconvenient for a long time. Harry let her have it without commenting. In the car, on the way back to Little Winging in the gray December dark, Dudley kept glancing at him in the way he'd been doing since September, the way that had replaced the Chase Harry game, that said the calculation had changed, and the result hadn't yet resolved. Harry sat with his bag on his lap and his wand in his pocket and watched the motorway lights going past. He thought about the year. Everything that had accumulated since September, the weight and the warmth of it. Classes and the library and flying in the cold morning, and the common room firelight and Ron's laugh and Hermione's exasperation, and Neville's growing steadiness, and the twins' coordinated chaos and McGonagall's precise and demanding care, and Hagrid's enormous simple love. The confrontation in the corridor, Quirrell and the thing in him, the contact and what it had done, Dumbledore's office and the things said and not said, the stone gone to Flamel who had decided enough was enough, the scar on his forehead, quieter than it had been, the fragment in it dim and crowded by 3 years of storm. He was going back to Privet Drive. He would be there for Christmas and it would be what it was, and then he would go to the Burrow because Ron had invited him with the ease of someone who assumed what was his was yours and wasn't keeping score. And in September he would go back. That was the thing about Hogwarts. You always went back. The castle had that quality of being the kind of place people came back to, not because they had to, but because it had become part of how they understood themselves. Harry had been there 3 months, and already he could feel it, the pull of the place, the specific gravity of something that had your name in its walls and your sky above its towers and your friends inside its fires. He would go back. The car turned onto Privet Drive, and the streetlights made identical orange pools on the identical driveways, and the identical hedges were uniformly clipped, and the houses were all exactly what they aspired to be, and it was as far from Hogwarts as it was possible to get while remaining in the same country. Harry looked at the cupboard under the stairs as they came through the front door. It was a cupboard. It held coats and vacuum cleaner and a specific density of memory. He looked at it and felt, not anger, not anymore, something calmer than that. The recognition that this was where he had become who he was, partly in the way that constraint shapes as much as freedom does, and that the shape wasn't bad. He went upstairs to Dudley's second bedroom. He unpacked his bag with the neatness that had become habit, school things stacked by subject, the Peveril account on the desk, wand accessible, the lemon drops on the windowsill where Hedwig would land when she arrived. He opened the window a crack for her and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, Privet Drive was doing what it always did on December evenings, lights coming on in identical front rooms, the blue flicker of televisions, the muffled sound of the 6 o'clock news. Ordinary, complete, sealed inside itself. Above it, Harry's sky was building something. He could feel it going up, the pressure differential, the charge accumulating in the low clouds, the particular quality of a storm that was coming because it was time for a storm, not his doing. Just weather being weather, following the patterns it had followed for longer than any individual human had been paying attention. But when the first lightning came down, white-blue, clean, far enough away that the thunder reached Privet Drive 6 seconds later like a question asked from a distance, Harry felt it in his chest the way he always did, like a recognition, like something calling his name in the only language it had. He leaned on the windowsill and watched the storm come in. He thought about the sorting hat saying you stayed. He thought about that field in August 3 years ago, the pylons overhead, the sky building itself in a minute. The boy who had stood there with his hands open instead of running. He was still that boy. He would always be underneath everything, the choices made, the distances crossed, the things learned and done and survived. Underneath all of it, the boy who had stayed. But he was also other things now. He was the boy who had told a mountain troll to leave and it had left, who had walked up a corridor towards something very old and very dangerous without breaking step, who had sat in Dumbledore's office and said I would like to come to you, not be sent for, and meant every word. He was Harry Potter. He was the boy who caught lightning. He was storm-marked and sovereign and 11 years old and going back to Hogwarts in September. He was, for the first time in his life, entirely himself. The storm broke over Little Winging with a sound like the sky deciding something, rain coming down in sheets, lightning walking the distance in long bright strides, thunder arriving in waves that made the windows shake. The whole of Privet Drive went dark as the power cut, transformers somewhere, the overload that came with direct lightning strikes to the grid. Harry sat in the dark on the windowsill with rain blowing cold through the gap and lightning painting the street in brilliant instants of white-blue, and he watched it, and the storm was in him like a tide, like a song, like the most natural thing in the world. He watched until the rain lightened and the lightning moved east over the Surrey Hills, and the distant thunder became something you could fall asleep to if you were so inclined. He was so inclined. He got into bed. He closed his eyes. Above Privet Drive, the sky cleared slowly, stars appearing one by one in the gaps between the retreating clouds, and Harry Potter, God of Thunder, age 11, boy who stayed, slept the deep, clean sleep of someone who knows exactly who they are and has decided that's enough. The storm rested with him, ready, as it always was, for what came next.